There is a town in America with no fixed address. It sits somewhere between the mountains and the ocean, between the heartland and the coast, between the kind of place you grew up in and the kind of place you only ever saw on television. It has a nuclear power plant, a tire fire that has been burning for decades, a gorge, a harbor, a monorail, a prison, two hospitals, and a convenience store that has been open every hour of every day since 1989. Its residents have 4 fingers on each hand. Their skin is a shade of yellow that does not appear anywhere else in the known world. Their children have not aged in 36 years. The town is called Springfield, and tonight, for the next 4 hours, we are going to take it apart piece by piece and look at everything the show has been hiding inside it. Some of what we find is funny, some of it is strange, and some of it, once it lands, will stay with you for a long time after the screen goes dark. Because The Simpsons is not just a cartoon. It never was. It is the longest-running primetime scripted series in the history of American television, with over 780 episodes across 36 seasons. It has been watched by more people, in more countries, in more languages, than almost any other piece of filmed entertainment ever produced. And somewhere inside all of those episodes, across all of those seasons, a story has been slowly accumulating. A story that nobody in Springfield can see because the town itself will not allow them to see it. A story about radiation and memory and power and what happens to a family when the system they live inside is designed from the ground up to keep them exactly where they are. So settle in, get comfortable, let the lights go low, because we are going somewhere tonight that most people never go. We are going to the part of Springfield they never show you in the opening credits. Number. Section 1. The nuclear mutation theory. Springfield is a contamination zone. Let's begin with the thing that has been sitting in plain sight since the show's second season, hiding behind a cartoon art style and 36 years of audience familiarity. The Springfield nuclear power plant is poisoning everyone who lives near it. Not as a metaphor, not as background satire about industrial America. Within the actual, canonical logic of the show's own universe, the power plant owned and operated by Charles Montgomery Burns is leaking radioactive material into the water supply, the air, and the soil of the surrounding town. The residents are being mutated by it. Their bodies have been altered by decades of chronic radiation exposure. Their cognitive function has been compromised. Their biology no longer obeys the same rules as the biology of people who live outside Springfield's borders. This is not a theory being imported from outside the show. The show tells you this directly. It has been telling you this for 3.5 decades. The only question worth asking is why, after all this time, almost nobody has taken it seriously. Let's start at the beginning. The Springfield nuclear power plant is described within the show as a 2-unit pressurized water reactor facility. It is the primary source of electrical power for the entire town of Springfield, which means every home, every business, every institution in the community is dependent on it. Charles Burns owns it outright. He has owned it for as long as anyone in Springfield can remember, which, given what we will later discuss about Burns's impossible lifespan, may well be longer than the modern regulatory framework for nuclear energy has even existed. In an early episode, the plant undergoes a surprise safety inspection. The inspectors find 342 separate violations. Not 3. Not a handful that could be quietly patched. 342. The estimated cost to bring the facility up to code is $56 million. Burns, a man whose personal fortune runs into the billions, refuses to spend it. The reason he gives is essentially that fixing the problems would mean acknowledging that the problems exist, and acknowledging that they exist would invite questions about what those problems have already done to the people living downwind. The violations themselves are worth describing, because the show does not linger on them the way you might expect. They are dropped into dialogue and visual gags, as if they are minor background details. Radioactive waste is being dumped directly into bodies of water. Radioactive waste is being disposed of on children's playgrounds. Plutonium bars are being used as paperweights on employee desks. The cooling towers have cracks that were patched with chewing gum. There are rats living in the facility's internal systems, and these rats glow. Not because of a light source, because of what they have absorbed. And then there is the detail the show drops so casually that it barely registers as alarming. Human skeletons in the basement. Bones. In the basement of an active nuclear facility. The show does not explain whose bones they are. It does not suggest that anyone ever investigated. It simply shows them to you and then moves the camera to something else. The skeletons have never been addressed in any subsequent episode. The people of Springfield have never asked about them. The question of who those people were, how they ended up dead inside a working reactor, and whether their deaths had anything to do with the radiation they were surrounded by, is one of the show's oldest and most quietly horrifying unanswered questions. Now consider who is standing between all of this and the people of Springfield. Homer Simpson is the plant's safety inspector. His literal professional function is to prevent this facility from becoming a danger to the surrounding community. He is the last human checkpoint between a leaking nuclear reactor and an unsuspecting civilian population. The show's own creator, Matt Groening, has stated in interviews that Homer has an IQ of 55. In a separate episode, Homer discovers that a crayon has been lodged in his brain since childhood, physically blocking neural pathways and reducing his cognitive function well below what it would otherwise be. Without the crayon, Homer is intelligent, articulate, and capable of sophisticated reasoning. With it, he is the man who once caused a nuclear incident by throwing a donut into the reactor core to see if it would grow bigger. He falls asleep at his workstation regularly. He has eaten donuts during active meltdown warnings. He has brought his children to work and allowed them to interact with equipment that should be behind multiple layers of security clearance. This man has been Springfield's primary nuclear safeguard for over 3 decades. The violations do not get fixed because Homer does not notice them. Or, when he does notice them, he does not act on them. Or, when he acts on them, his interventions are so spectacularly misguided that they make the situation worse rather than better. Homer Simpson is not a safety inspector who is occasionally incompetent. He is an instrument through which the plant's dangers are perpetuated, maintained, and kept invisible to anyone who might otherwise intervene. We will come back to why that might be intentional a little later. For now, hold that thought. The first visible evidence of the plant's biological effects on the surrounding ecosystem appears in Season 2, in the form of Blinky. Blinky is a fish, a 3-eyed fish, pulled from the river that runs near the power plant. Blinky becomes a local news story almost immediately, and then a national one, because the gubernatorial candidate running against Burns at the time seizes on Blinky as proof that Burns's plant is contaminating the local environment. Burns, in one of the show's most perfectly constructed moments, is forced to eat Blinky on live television in order to demonstrate that the fish is harmless. He takes a bite. His expression in the seconds that follow is deeply uncomfortable, though the show plays it for laughs. He spits the fish out off camera as soon as the broadcast cuts away. The town watches this, processes it, and moves on. Nobody conducts a follow-up study on the river. Nobody tests the water coming out of Springfield's residential taps. Nobody asks the question that should be unavoidable given the evidence literally flopping in front of them. If the fish have developed a third eye from radiation exposure, what is the same radiation doing to the humans who have been drinking and cooking with and bathing in the same water for decades? The show does not answer this question directly, but it answers it indirectly, and the answer has been visible in every frame of every episode since the very beginning. Look at the physical characteristics of Springfield's residents. Homer Simpson has a skull shape that does not correspond to any known human bone structure. His eyes bulge outward in a way that suggests the orbital bones around them have been deformed. He has 4 fingers on each hand. His overbite is severe enough that it represents a significant dental and facial abnormality. His body fat distribution and his baseline physical proportions are unusual even by the standards of animated characters designed to look exaggerated. And his healing rate, the speed and completeness with which his body recovers from physical trauma, is so far outside normal human parameters that it has become one of the show's running jokes. Homer has been shot, he has been electrocuted, he has fallen off cliffs. He has been struck by cars, he has survived explosions at close range. He has fallen from buildings, been crushed by heavy machinery, had objects of significant mass land directly on his body, and walked away from every single one of these events. Sometimes within minutes. Sometimes while still eating a donut. The standard explanation the show's writers and most casual viewers reach for is cartoon physics. Of course, Homer survives impossible things. It is a cartoon. Characters in cartoons do not die from slapstick. But The Simpsons has never been a slapstick cartoon in the way that Looney Tunes or Tom and Jerry are slapstick cartoons. The show has depicted death as a real and permanent thing many times. Characters die in Springfield. They stay dead. The rules of consequence apply in Springfield in ways that they simply do not apply in shows that are purely operating in exaggerated physical comedy territory. So, Homer's superhuman survival cannot be entirely explained away as cartoon logic, because cartoon logic does not consistently apply to everyone in Springfield. Only Homer's injuries play by those rules. Other characters get hurt. Other characters die. Homer simply does not. Something is different about Homer Simpson's body. Something has changed in it at a level deep enough to make him functionally resistant to physical damage that would kill a normal human being. And the most coherent explanation for what that something is points directly to the cracked cooling towers that dominate the Springfield skyline. Radiation, at certain exposure levels and under certain conditions, does not simply kill cells. It mutates them. It changes the way biological systems function. It can reduce cognitive capacity. It can also, in ways that are still not entirely understood, produce anomalous cellular behaviors. Burn survivors and radiation exposure victims sometimes display unusual healing responses. The relationship between radiation and biology is not a simple story of destruction. It is a story of alteration. And in a town that has been breathing irradiated air, drinking irradiated water, and living within the shadow of a leaking reactor for over 30 years, the biological alteration on display in Springfield's residents is exactly what you would expect to see. Marge Simpson has the same bulging eyes as Homer. She has 4 fingers. Her hair grows in a way that defies both physics and biology, rising in a perfect blue tower that she has maintained in the exact same shape for 36 years, without the structural collapse that would affect any normal human hairstyle of that height and mass. Marge worked at the nuclear plant briefly, which means she has her own direct exposure history on top of whatever ambient contamination Springfield's environment provides. Bart, Lisa, and Maggie were all born after both of their parents had already been living in Springfield's contaminated environment. They were gestating in a body that had already absorbed years of radioactive exposure. They were born into a town where the water was already compromised, where the air carried whatever the plant had been releasing for years before any of them existed. And every single one of them displays the same physical characteristics: the 4 fingers, the overbite, the eyes, the yellow skin that mark every other Springfield resident as physiologically distinct from people who live outside the town. The yellow skin is the detail that deserves the most attention, and the show has accidentally told you exactly what it means through the way it draws its guest characters. When people visit Springfield from outside celebrities, government officials, characters from other cities and states, they look different from the residents. Not slightly different, fundamentally different. Their proportions are more natural. Their eyes are drawn with more realistic dimensions. Their facial structures are closer to what actual human beings look like. A guest character standing next to a Springfield resident in the same frame looks like a person standing next to a distorted version of a person. The accepted reading of this is that it is simply the show's art style. Springfield characters have the Simpsons look because they are Simpsons characters. Guests look different because they are not part of that visual vocabulary. But within the logic of the show's own universe, that explanation dissolves the moment you take it seriously. Because if you inhabit the fictional world of Springfield as if it is a real place, which is exactly what the radiation theory asks you to do, then the visual difference between residents and visitors is not an art choice. It is an observable biological difference. The people who live inside the contamination zone look one way. The people who come from outside it look another way. The mutation is visible. It is documented in every frame of every episode. The show has been showing you the effects of 36 years of nuclear contamination in every single shot of every single character for its entire run. And the animals. Santa's little helper, the Simpson family dog, has the same bulging eyes as his owners. His proportions deviate from actual greyhound anatomy in ways that mirror the deviations in the human characters around him. The family cat has similar characteristics. Springfield's wildlife is demonstrably affected by the plant's runoff. Blinky was the first piece of evidence. The family pets are part of the same pattern. Every living organism in Springfield that has been exposed to the town's environment for an extended period of time shows the same suite of physical alterations. The show tells you this. It tells you with Blinky. It tells you with the glow-in-the-dark rats. It tells you with Homer's skull and Marge's hair and the way every Springfield child looks like a slightly distorted human being rather than a fully proportioned one. And then it expects you to believe that none of this adds up to anything. That the same radiation affecting every fish, every dog, every cat, and every visible piece of Springfield's ecosystem has had zero detectable effect on the humans living in its center. Now consider what Season 8's episode, The Springfield Files, reveals about Burns himself. Homer, wandering in the woods near Springfield at night, encounters what he describes as an alien. The creature is humanoid but wrong too thin, moving strangely, emitting a visible green glow from its skin. The episode spends most of its runtime building toward a dramatic reveal. FBI agents are called in, the town panics. The mystery of what Homer saw in the woods drives the plot forward with genuine narrative momentum. And the answer, when it comes, is one of the most quietly devastating reveals in the show's history. The alien is Mr. Burns. Burns undergoes a weekly medical treatment so chemically and radiologically intensive that it causes his entire body to emit a visible green glow for hours afterward. The treatment keeps him alive for exactly 1 more week. Without it, he dies. The regimen is so extreme that after each session, Burns wanders out into the night in a state of dazed, chemical euphoria, stumbling through the forest like a creature from outside normal human experience. He literally radiates light. The people of Springfield see this glowing figure in the woods, and their first hypothesis is not the nuclear power plant that has been leaking radiation into their environment for decades. Their first hypothesis is extraterrestrial contact. They look at a man saturated with radiation, a man who physically glows because his body contains so much radioactive material that it emits visible light, and they think alien before they think nuclear. That is the depth of the town's disconnection from the reality of what surrounds them. That is what 3 decades of cognitive compromise looks like when it is expressed as a community response to evidence. The Simpsons movie makes the contamination impossible to ignore any further. Springfield's environmental degradation reaches a point so catastrophic that the Environmental Protection Agency, a real federal regulatory agency operating within the show's narrative universe, determines that the only viable solution is physical containment. A massive glass dome is lowered over the entire town to prevent Springfield's pollution from spreading to the rest of the country. Think about what that means as a plot point. The United States government looked at Springfield, assessed its environmental condition, and concluded that the town was so fundamentally toxic, so thoroughly contaminated, so dangerous to the surrounding region, that sealing it permanently was preferable to attempting remediation. Springfield was classified not as a city in need of cleanup, but as a containment problem. The town itself became the hazard. Its population became collateral that could not be allowed to move freely in the outside world until the contamination was addressed. And the people inside the dome are the same people who have been living in that contamination. Every resident who drank the water, breathed the air, ate the fish from the river, every child who played near the plant, every family that lived within the power plant's shadow, they are all inside when the dome comes down, and none of them thought to leave before it happened, because none of them ever fully processed that there was a reason to leave. The radiation theory does not require you to believe anything that the show has not already told you. It requires you to connect the things the show has told you and follow them to their logical conclusion. The plant is leaking. The environment is contaminated. The fish are mutated. The residents display biological characteristics that distinguish them from non-Springfield humans. Their cognitive function is compromised. Their healing responses are anomalous. Their collective ability to perceive and respond to threats to their own well-being is demonstrably diminished. All of this is in the show. All of it is canon. The question is not whether the radiation theory is supported by evidence. It is supported by more canonical evidence than almost any other reading of the show's internal logic. The question is why nobody, not the characters, not the critics, not the cultural conversation around one of the most analyzed television shows ever made, took it seriously for as long as they didn't. And the answer to that question might be the darkest part of the whole theory. Because here is what the radiation theory implies about the mechanism of Burns's control over Springfield. A population with compromised cognitive function is a population that cannot effectively organize resistance. A community where the water supply has been contaminated with substances that affect neurological development is a community where critical thinking is systematically undermined at the biological level. If the plant has been leaking into Springfield's water for 30 years, and if that contamination has affected the cognitive capacity of every resident who drank that water during those 30 years, then the people of Springfield are not simply ignorant of what is happening to them because they choose to be ignorant. They are neurologically compromised. Their ability to connect the dots, to perceive patterns, to look at a three-eyed fish and understand what it means for their own bodies, has been damaged. And this is where Homer's crayon becomes something more than a physical comedy subplot. Season 12 reveals that Homer once had the crayon removed from his brain. With the obstruction cleared, his IQ rises dramatically. He becomes intelligent, articulate, capable of sustained analytical thought. He sees Springfield clearly, possibly for the first time in his adult life. He sees the power plant. He sees his job. He sees the architecture of his own life. And it makes him profoundly, genuinely miserable. The world as Homer Simpson experiences it when his brain is fully functional is a world of uncomfortable truths and stark realities that have no good solutions available to him. So he has the crayon put back in. He chooses the cognitive limitation. He chooses the fog. The show plays this as a comedy beat Homer, preferring comfortable stupidity to painful clarity is a classic Homer gag. But underneath the joke is a devastating observation. The fog is more bearable than the truth. The damage is more survivable than the clarity. And Homer is not unique in this. The entire town of Springfield has made the same choice Homer makes in that episode, except Springfield made it collectively and without ever being offered the alternative. The town did not choose the fog because the fog is pleasant. The town chose the fog because the fog arrived before the choice did. By the time any Springfield resident was old enough to perceive the contamination and understand what it meant, the contamination had already altered the very neural architecture that would have allowed them to respond to it. Burns did not just build a plant that leaked. He built a system. The plant poisons the water. The water damages the brain. The brain cannot perceive the damage. The damaged brain cannot mount effective resistance. The plant continues to leak, and Burns, standing at the center of all of it, undergoing his weekly treatments, managing his own radiation exposure with resources that no Springfield resident could ever access, watches the whole cycle sustain itself. His continued employment of Homer as safety inspector is not negligence. When German investors purchased the plant briefly, the first thing they did upon taking ownership was fire Homer. The second thing they did was commission an assessment of the cost required to bring the facility into regulatory compliance, and the estimate nearly bankrupted them. Burns bought the plant back and immediately reinstated Homer. A competent safety inspector would shut the plant down. Homer ensures it stays open. And while it stays open, the water stays compromised, the violations stay unaddressed, and the population stays exactly as cognitively impaired as Burns requires them to be to maintain his monopoly over the town's economy and power supply. The radiation theory is not a dark reading of a cheerful show. It is a reading that takes the show's own evidence seriously. Springfield is not a quirky animated town. Within the internal logic of its own universe, it is a contaminated zone whose residents are symptomatic of decades of unchecked industrial poisoning. Every strange physical characteristic, every anomalous healing event, every moment of inexplicable collective amnesia, every reset that erases catastrophic events between episodes, all of it connects back to the same source. The cracked cooling towers, the leaking reactor, the three-eyed fish that everyone saw, noted, and then forgot to keep asking about. The Springfield nuclear power plant is not part of the show's background. It is the show's engine. Everything runs on it. Everything flows from it. And the show has been telling you that for 36 years, in every frame, in every episode, in every yellow face and four-fingered hand and inexplicably resilient body, you just had to know where to look. Drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from and what time it is there. We love seeing where these videos reach. And if you're settling in for the night, hit subscribe so you never miss a new breakdown. Now, let's keep going, because things are about to get significantly stranger. Number, Section 2. Homer's coma, everything. Since 1993 is a dream. Here is a question that should bother you more than it does. What if the radiation theory is correct, but it only exists inside the mind of a man who has been unconscious since April of 1993? What if every single thing we just discussed, the mutations, the contamination, the three-eyed fish, the dome, the compromised cognition, all of it is not a fact about Springfield, but a thought inside the slowly deteriorating brain of a man lying in a hospital bed in Springfield General, breathing through a machine, surrounded by a family that has been sitting beside him for over 30 years, waiting for him to open his eyes? This is the Homer coma theory. It is the most widely discussed, most debated, and most internally consistent fan theory in the entire history of The Simpsons. And the reason it refuses to go away, the reason it keeps being revisited and refined and expanded despite the show's producers explicitly dismissing it, is that it explains things about the show that no official explanation has ever adequately addressed. Let's go back to the beginning. The 1st of April, 1993, Season 4, Episode 18. The episode is called So It's Come to This, a Simpsons clip show. It airs during The Simpsons' 4th season, which many fans and critics consider the show's artistic peak, the period when it was most grounded, most emotionally coherent, and most carefully constructed. The episode's premise begins as a clip show, a common television format where a new framing story is used to revisit footage from previous episodes. The framing story involves Bart playing a series of increasingly escalating April Fool's pranks on Homer. The pranks build until Bart, apparently running out of ideas, takes one of Homer's cans of beer to an auto body shop and places it inside an industrial paint shaker. He shakes the can until it is pressurized far beyond anything a normal beer can should contain, seals it back up, and places it back in the refrigerator. Homer finds the can, opens it. The explosion sends him to the hospital. While he is lying in his hospital bed, recovering from injuries that are serious but apparently survivable, he notices a vending machine across the room. He wants a candy bar. He gets up, the machine tips over, it lands on him, and Homer Simpson flatlines on a hospital floor in Springfield General and enters a coma. The episode does not treat this as a gag. It is presented with genuine dramatic weight. Homer's family gathers. The doctors are grim. There is a real, sustained tension around whether Homer will survive this. And then, after several days, he does. Bart comes to his bedside, tearfully confesses that the whole chain of events was his fault, and Homer snaps awake and immediately begins strangling his son. The family laughs. The credits roll. Everything goes back to normal. Except, in the final moments of that episode, before the credits, a doctor informs the Simpson family that Homer lost 5% of his brain function during the coma. Not temporarily impaired, permanently destroyed. 5% of Homer's brain simply stopped working and will never work again. The cells that contained those functions are gone. Homer's response to receiving this information is to laugh. He says he does not know why he is laughing, and the family finds this charming rather than alarming. The episode ends. Season 4 continues. The Simpsons runs for 32 more seasons, over 700 additional episodes, without ever returning to what a man who lost 5% of his brain function during a coma actually looks like or experiences. The Homer coma theory, originally developed and articulated on Reddit by a user called Hard Topic a Name, proposes a simple and extraordinarily elegant explanation for why that brain damage is never addressed. Homer did not wake up. The scene where Bart confesses and Homer springs to life is itself part of the dream. Every episode of The Simpsons that has aired after the 1st of April, 1993, every single story, every character development, every impossible event, every guest star, every couch gag is a projection being generated by the unconscious mind of a man in a medically induced coma, lying in a hospital in Springfield, slowly losing brain function while his family waits. The evidence is not just circumstantial, it accumulates, and it accumulates in ways that are very difficult to dismiss once you start paying attention. The first and most compelling piece of evidence is the tonal shift. Before Season 4, before the coma, The Simpsons was a different kind of show. Not unrecognizably different, it was always The Simpsons, always a cartoon family comedy with a satirical edge. But the kinds of stories it told were grounded in recognizable human experience. Homer tries to quit drinking. Marge worries about whether she has made the right choices in life. Bart struggles in school and faces real consequences. Lisa develops a crush and has her heart broken in the ordinary, painful way that children's hearts get broken. The show was rooted in the kind of domestic anxiety that actual middle-class American families actually experience. Financial pressure, marital strain, academic failure, the fear of not being enough for the people you love. These were the emotional materials the early Simpsons was built from, and they gave the show a warmth and a human truth that elevated it above other animated comedies of the era. After the coma, the register changes. The shift is not subtle, and it is not gradual. It is a pivot point. Homer goes to space, Mr. Burns acquires and then loses the Loch Ness Monster. Homer discovers his mother is a fugitive radical who has been hiding from the FBI for decades. Homer joins a secret society. Homer meets God. Homer becomes the manager of a country music star, then a boxing promoter, then a food critic, then a snowplow operator, then a sugar baron, then an astronaut, then a professional stunt performer, then dozens of other things across dozens of other episodes. The escalation from grounded domestic sitcom to surreal picaresque adventure is so dramatic that it has been a central subject of fan debate about the show's quality for 20 years. The standard explanation for this shift is that the writers ran out of grounded family stories and began reaching for more outlandish premises. That happens with long-running shows. The creative ambition has to grow, or the show stagnates. The coma theory offers a different explanation. Homer's brain is deteriorating. As the years pass and the coma deepens, as more of his neural function is lost to the same process that destroyed 5% of his brain in that hospital room, the dream becomes less tethered to reality. The simulation his unconscious mind is running cannot maintain the same level of coherent, grounded detail that it could manage in the early seasons when his brain was still closer to functional, so the world gets stranger. The plots get more elaborate and less realistic. The logic becomes more associative and less causal. The dream is running on degraded hardware, and the degradation is visible in the kind of stories it tells. The aging problem is where the coma theory becomes genuinely difficult to argue against. Nobody in Springfield ages. Bart has been 10 years old for 36 years. Lisa has been 8. Maggie has been 1. Homer and Marge have not aged perceptibly since the show began in 1989. This is the single most discussed impossibility in The Simpsons, and every explanation for it runs into the same fundamental problem. Even within the logic of the explanation itself, it does not quite hold together. The radiation theory says the cellular mutation has somehow suspended the aging process. But radiation does not stop aging. Radiation accelerates cellular damage, which typically accelerates aging. The radiation theory explains many things, but it struggles with the agelessness. The cartoon logic explanation says that long-running animated shows simply do not allow their characters to age, because aging requires either eventually ending the show or telling increasingly implausible stories about young children who are now adults. This is true as a production reality, but it is not an in-universe explanation. It is an acknowledgement that the show is not trying to represent a coherent timeline, and that is exactly the kind of answer that the coma theory makes unnecessary. Homer's children do not age because they exist inside the mind of a man who went unconscious in April 1993. His unconscious brain cannot imagine his children growing up because he was not there to see it happen. The last time Homer truly perceived Bart, Bart was 10 years old. The last time Homer truly perceived Lisa, Lisa was 8. The last time he held Maggie, she was 1. His brain froze them at those ages because those are the ages he has. Those are the reference points his dreaming mind has to work with. Every parent in a coma dreams their children young, not because they are delusional, but because the mind works with what it has. Homer's mind has the children he knew in the spring of 1993. It runs simulations of those children forward, inventing adventures and stories and crises and resolutions, but it cannot age them because it does not have the sensory data that would correspond to their older selves. It cannot imagine what a 17-year-old Bart looks like or sounds like, because Homer has never experienced a 17-year-old Bart. So the dream keeps Bart at 10. It keeps Lisa at 8. It keeps Maggie at 1. Not because of a production constraint, because of a neurological one. Marge does not age in the dream because the last time Homer truly saw Marge, she looked like that. She sounded like that. She moved through their house like that. He loves her so completely and so desperately that his unconscious mind reconstructs her in perfect detail, exactly as she was, and it cannot allow that reconstruction to change because changing it would mean accepting that time has passed, and accepting that time has passed would mean confronting the possibility that the woman sitting beside his hospital bed does not look like that anymore. The celebrity appearances in later seasons fit the theory almost too neatly. From season 5 onward, the show becomes increasingly populated by famous people playing versions of themselves in Springfield. The parade of celebrity guest stars is one of the most frequently cited symptoms of the show's decline, the argument being that the writers substituted cultural name recognition for genuine storytelling. The coma theory reframes this entirely. Homer's brain is in a hospital room. Sound reaches him from the television in that room, from conversations happening near his bed, from radios and phones and the ambient media environment of a hospital. His coma brain processes these sounds and incorporates them into the dream. A voice on the television becomes a character in Springfield. A name mentioned in a conversation at his bedside becomes a Springfield resident for the duration of that episode. The celebrity flood is not a sign of creative decline. It is a sign of Homer's brain absorbing more and more external stimuli, as the simulation becomes less self-sustaining. The dream needs raw material to keep running, and the raw material is whatever leaks in from the waking world. Season 34 contains what is perhaps the most tantalizing piece of evidence the show has ever offered for the coma theory, and it is all the more tantalizing because of the way it was presented. The episode Lisa the Boy Scout includes a scene promoted publicly, widely discussed online, in which Homer wakes up from a long coma and reveals that the entire run of the show since a certain point was, in fact, a dream. The scene is detailed. It is animated to the same quality as the rest of the episode. It was not a brief throwaway moment. It was a full, extended sequence depicting exactly what the coma theory describes. And then the show pulled back and said it was a hoax. The scene had been planted by fictional hackers, not created by the writers. It was, officially, not real. But the fact that it was created at all is revelatory. Someone at the show, multiple people, working over an extended period, animated, voiced, and prepared a sequence depicting Homer waking from a coma to reveal that everything had been a dream. The writers of The Simpsons engaged with the coma theory seriously enough to produce a fully realized version of its conclusion, and then they packaged that conclusion as a denial. They showed you the answer and called it a joke, and the audience laughed, in exactly the same way Homer laughed when he was told he had permanently lost 5% of his brain. Executive producer Al Jean addressed the coma theory directly in 2015, stating clearly that it is not true and dismissing it as fan speculation. But Jean's dismissal contains a notable gap. He says the theory is wrong. He does not say why the show becomes dramatically stranger after season 4. He does not explain why no character ages. He does not address the conversation God has with Homer in the season 4 premiere, 6 months before the coma episode, in which God tells Homer that his time has not yet come, but that it will come. He does not explain why the show becomes more surreal and more internally inconsistent with each passing season, in exactly the pattern you would expect from a dream being generated by a progressively deteriorating brain. He says it is not true. The evidence says something more complicated. Now, here is the part of the coma theory that tends to stay with people long after they first encounter it. If the coma theory is correct, then the emotional core of The Simpsons is not comedy, it is grief. Homer's deepest want is not adventure. It is not celebrity. It is not hundreds of different jobs or international travel or encounters with historical figures. Homer's deepest want is his family. It is Marge still loving him. It is Bart still being his mischievous little boy. It is Lisa playing her saxophone. It is Maggie being small enough to hold. It is the ordinary Friday night in the house on Evergreen Terrace that Homer, lying in a hospital bed, is no longer able to experience, and the coma gives him all of it. The dream preserves his family exactly as they were the last moment he was truly with them. His children never grow up in the dream because growing up means time is passing, and time passing means the coma is deepening. His wife never changes because changing would mean acknowledging absence. The world resets after every catastrophe because the dreaming brain cannot sustain damage to the things it is working hardest to protect. Homer survives every impossible injury in the dream because his body in the dream is not his actual body. His actual body is in a hospital bed. The dream body is invincible because the dream needs it to be invincible. If Homer dies in the dream ends. And if the dream ends, Homer has to wake up. And waking up means finding out how much time has passed, how old his children are, whether Marge is still there, or worse, not waking up at all. The coma is not a nightmare. It is the only version of heaven a man like Homer Simpson would ever want. A house where the kids are always young and the beer is always cold and nobody ever has to say goodbye. Every episode is an act of love. A man dreaming about his family because they are all he has to dream about. Every reset, every impossible recovery, every moment where everything goes back to normal at the end of the episode, it is not lazy writing. It is Homer's unconscious mind refusing to let the story end. Because the story ending means Homer has to wake up. And waking up is the thing the dream is designed to prevent. Number Number. Section 3. Who really shot Mr. Burns, the case that was never actually closed? Before we get into this, let's acknowledge the obvious answer. Maggie did it. Season 7, Episode 1, case closed. Baby pulled the trigger. Everyone go home. Except the case was never closed. Not really. And the more carefully you look at the evidence, the physical evidence, the canonical statements, the alternate versions that were fully produced and then suppressed, the more the official verdict starts to feel like exactly what it probably is in Springfield. A convenience packaged as a conclusion. Let's go back to the summer of 1995. The Simpsons, then at the absolute peak of its cultural dominance, did something that had never been attempted by an animated show before. It constructed a genuine mystery, a who-did-it cliffhanger, designed carefully enough that the show's creators publicly claimed it was solvable from the clues presented in Part 1 and promoted a national contest, inviting viewers to submit their guess for who shot Mr. Burns, with the winner to be animated into a future episode of the show. Fox promoted it like a cultural event. America's Most Wanted produced a tie-in special called Springfield's Most Wanted, treating the fictional shooting like an actual unsolved crime. Newspaper coverage, radio segments, water cooler conversations. The summer of 1995 was the summer of a burning question, and the question was who pulled the trigger. To understand what was at stake in that question, you need to understand what Burns had done in the lead-up to the shooting. Burns had, by the end of Part 1, managed to personally harm virtually every significant resident of Springfield in some way. He stole an oil well from beneath Springfield Elementary, destroying the school's operational budget. He shut down Moe's Tavern by driving its owner to financial ruin. He built a device that blocked the sun over the entire town of Springfield, not metaphorically, not partially, but completely. A massive mechanical disc that literally prevented sunlight from reaching the residents. He did this so that Springfield would be forced to purchase electricity from his plant, since natural solar energy would no longer be available to them. When Smithers, Burns's lifelong assistant, expressed moral objection to blocking out the sun from an entire community, Burns fired him. By the end of Part 1, the list of Springfield residents with a genuine motive to harm Charles Montgomery Burns was essentially the entire population of the town. Homer, because Burns had never once remembered his name in years of employment and had driven him to a breaking point of rage. Bart and Lisa, because their school had lost its funding. Groundskeeper Willie, because he had lost his job. Grandpa Simpson, because the retirement home was damaged by a sinkhole Burns created. Tito Puente, because Burns cut the music program. Moe, because his bar was destroyed. Even Smithers, freshly fired and spiral into alcoholism, had every reason to want revenge. All of them gathered at a public town meeting to confront Burns. Multiple characters were visibly carrying weapons. The tension was real and sustained. Burns collapsed. A single gunshot wound. He staggered onto the town sundial, his hands landing on 2 letters. The screen went black. America waited. Part 2 resolved the mystery in September of that year. The investigation, handled with characteristic incompetence by Chief Wiggum and the Springfield police, works through the suspects one by one. Smithers confesses immediately, but his confession unravels when it is revealed he was blackout drunk at the time and actually shot a completely different person, old Jasper, in his wooden leg at a different location. The alibi parade continues. Skinner has one. Moe has one. Tito Puente has, arguably, the greatest alibi in television history. A full musical number explaining that he sublimated his rage into a samba. Police find an eyelash on Burns's suit. DNA analysis points to a Simpson. Homer's fingerprints are on the gun. He is arrested. He is about to be charged. And then Burns wakes up and, from his hospital bed, identifies the shooter. It was Maggie, a baby. Specifically, Burns's account says he encountered Maggie in the parking lot after the town meeting, attempted to take her lollipop, his gun fell from his holster during the struggle, and Maggie picked it up and it discharged. Chief Wiggum acknowledges, essentially out loud, that this is a convenient answer. No jury in the world would convict a baby. Case officially closed. Here is why the case was never actually closed. Begin with the contest itself. Fox invited viewers across America to submit their guess. Thousands upon thousands of entries were received. The prize was significant. The winner would be animated into a future episode of the show. And according to the DVD commentary for these episodes, When producers examined a sample of the entries, not a single person from that sample had correctly guessed Maggie. The contest prize was awarded randomly from the pool, and since the selected person had not given the right answer, they received a cash payment instead of being animated. The writers acknowledged on that same commentary that one person had posted the correct answer to a Simpsons online news group on the night of the original broadcast. But this person was using a college internet account that was no longer active by the time the producers tried to track them down. They could not find them. They issued an open invitation on the DVD for this person to come forward. As far as anyone knows, that person never did. So, the show's creators designed a mystery, told the public it was solvable from the evidence in Part 1, ran a national contest around it, and when the answer was revealed, essentially no one had figured it out from the clues. The most charitable interpretation of this is that the red herrings were too effective. A less charitable interpretation is that the answer did not follow logically from the evidence the way the show claimed it did. The clues, examined after the fact, point in several directions simultaneously, and the direction they most clearly point toward is not a baby in a parking lot. Consider the sundial. Burns falls and his hands land on two letters, W and S, or from his own perspective, M and S, which the show uses to indicate Maggie Simpson's initials. The producers and the episode's resolution treat this as the central confirmatory clue. M for Maggie, S for Simpson. The sundial tells you who did it. Except Burns himself, canonically and on the record, stated that the positioning of his hands on the sundial was not intentional. He did not deliberately arrange himself to spell out his attacker's initials. He fell. The letters are where they are because that is where his hands landed when he collapsed. The sundial clue, the most widely cited piece of physical evidence in the show's own resolution, was explicitly described by the victim as a coincidence. Burns said it was meaningless. The show used it as proof. These two things cannot both be true simultaneously. Then there is the gun. Burns's holster, in the episode, is shown to be empty before the shooting. The gun was already missing from his person prior to the attack. This means the shooter did not bring their own weapon. They used Burns's gun, which means they encountered it at the scene rather than arriving with violent intent. They were not armed and planning to shoot. They found the weapon and used it in the moment. A baby finding a gun on the ground is consistent with this profile. So is approximately a dozen other characters who were present that night without weapons of their own. Burns's last words before being shot are documented by the show itself. "Oh, it's you." He recognized his attacker. The greeting carries no fear, no surprise. The casual familiarity of someone who knows who they are looking at and does not consider that person a threat. Burns sees them and says it as if acknowledging a familiar face. The question worth sitting with is whether this greeting is consistent with Burns seeing an infant. Burns famously cannot remember Homer's name despite years of employing him. He struggles to retain the identities of people he interacts with regularly. Yet when his attacker appears in the parking lot, his response is immediate recognition, casual, and calm. The kind of recognition you reserve for someone you have a specific, established relationship with. Does Burns have a specific, established relationship with Maggie? The show does not document one prior to this episode. Burns has interacted with Homer, with Marge, and here we will park an important detail for a moment, and with the broader Simpson family in various episodes. But Maggie specifically? A relationship intimate enough that Burns, upon seeing her, immediately recognizes her and responds with the kind of low-key acknowledgement that the phrase, "Oh, it's you," implies. That does not track with how Burns is written in any other episode. Now consider what Season 18 adds to the record. Homer Simpson, in a canonical episode, casually claims out loud that he was actually the one who shot Burns. He says it on camera. No investigation follows. No one reopens the case. No authority in Springfield treats this as the confession to a violent crime against the richest man in town that it technically is. The show presents this as a throwaway line and moves on. Either Homer is lying for attention entirely possible given his character, or the original verdict was wrong and Homer knows it because he is the one who pulled the trigger. If Homer shot Burns, then the DNA evidence, an eyelash from a Simpson, points to him rather than to Maggie. His fingerprints on the gun make obvious sense, and his motive, the most fully developed motive of any character in the episode, is suddenly more than just a red herring. The Marge theory is worth laying out carefully, because it is one of the most compelling alternatives to the official resolution. A Reddit argument that gained significant traction proposes that Marge was the actual shooter, and that Burns, who had, in an earlier episode, developed an infatuation with Marge to the point of attempting to woo her, chose to protect her when he woke from his coma. Burns looks around the hospital room. He sees the Simpsons family. He has a choice. He can name the person who shot him, the person he loves in his own corrupt and possessive way, and watch her be prosecuted. Or he can gesture at the sundial, let the town draw its own conclusion, and allow the blame to fall on someone who cannot be prosecuted. A baby cannot be convicted. Chief Wiggum says so himself. No jury in the world would convict a baby. Maggie is the perfect protected explanation. She is innocent by legal default before the investigation even begins, which means naming Maggie is not really naming a shooter at all. It is disposing of the case cleanly while protecting the person Burns actually wants to protect. And then there is the question the show never asks but should. In a town where every single person had a motive, where multiple characters were visibly carrying weapons at a public meeting, where the target had just stolen the sun from the entire community, how is it possible that only one person fired a shot? Springfield is not a town known for restraint. Its residents form angry mobs over minor grievances. They have rioted over local politics, entertainment choices, and disputes that would barely register as minor inconveniences in a more stable community. When Burns blocks the sun and threatens the long-term survival of every living thing in their home, the most dramatic communal response is a single gunshot? That level of restraint is so inconsistent with Springfield's documented behavioral history that it deserves its own theory. Either the shooting was more planned and more deliberate than the parking lot accident story suggests, or someone with very specific interests in how the investigation concluded managed the aftermath in a way that produced the most convenient possible result. And the alternate endings confirm that even the people who made the episode were not fully committed to the Maggie answer. A complete alternate conclusion was produced in which Smithers is revealed as the shooter, fully animated, fully voiced, broadcast quality. This alternate ending was shown in The Simpsons' 138th episode Spectacular, hosted by Troy McClure, who dismisses it by saying it would not have made sense because the Simpson DNA evidence would have had to be ignored, which would be, in his words, downright nutty. The reference is to the O.J. Simpson trial, in which a jury did in fact choose to disregard DNA evidence. The show is telling you, through a fictional character's dismissal of a fictional ending, that ignoring DNA evidence to reach a verdict happens, that official answers are not always accurate answers. An early draft of the script had Barney Gumble as the shooter. The writers considered this seriously. They planned to send him to prison. They abandoned it, but the existence of the draft confirms that the answer was not determined by the clues. The clues were constructed around whatever answer the writers eventually chose. The mystery was reverse engineered, not solved. The final shot of Part 2 is the show's most cryptic acknowledgement that the mystery is genuinely open. Maggie is alone in the room. She looks around carefully, deliberately checking that no one is watching. Then she moves her pacifier in a motion that mimics the act of pulling a trigger. The show wants you to read this as confirmation. Maggie did it and she knows what she did. But there is another reading. A baby who witnessed a shooting would also mimic what she saw. That is what babies do. They repeat behavior they observe. Maggie is not necessarily confessing to the act. She may be remembering it. She may have watched someone else fire that gun, and she is repeating the physical motion the way a child repeats any striking gesture they observe in an adult. Not because she understands the significance of what she saw, but because it was memorable enough to stick. Maggie may not be the perpetrator. She may be the only witness. And witnesses in Springfield tend to stay very quiet about what they have seen. Number. Section 4. The immortality of Charles Montgomery Burns, too expensive to die. By any reasonable standard of measurement, Charles Montgomery Burns should not be alive. This is not a statement about cartoon physics or the selective application of consequence in a long-running animated show. Within the established, documented internal logic of The Simpsons' own universe, Charles Montgomery Burns is a medical impossibility. His continued existence represents a sustained violation of the biological rules that govern every other character on the show. And the explanation for how he has managed to survive for as long as he has is simultaneously one of the darkest and most coherent pieces of sustained storytelling the show has ever done. Let's establish the timeline first, because the timeline itself is remarkable. Burns's birth year has been referenced, implied, and stated at various points across the show's run. The specific date shifts depending on the episode, as the show's floating timeline tends to create inconsistencies in backstory, but every version of the calculation places his birth somewhere in the late 1800s. He has referenced personal memories of events from before the turn of the 20th century. He has spoken of experiences from the 1910s as first-hand recollections rather than historical knowledge. He describes interactions with people who have been dead for the better part of a century as if he knew them personally. He attended Yale. He served in the Second World War, during which he managed to steal a $1 trillion bill from the United States government and keep it hidden for decades. He has described the Gilded Age not as a period of history but as a time he personally inhabited. By the most conservative calculation, Burns is well over 100 years old. By a more generous reading of the various dates and references scattered across the show's continuity, he may be pushing 140. The show does not commit to a specific number, which is almost certainly deliberate. The writers understand that pinning Burns to a precise age would create testable inconsistencies, so they keep his antiquity as a quality rather than a quantity. Burns is ancient. How ancient? Exactly, the show leaves ambiguous. And yet he functions. Not merely survives, but operates with sustained strategic intelligence and genuine executive competence. He runs a multi-billion-dollar corporation. He manipulates Springfield's municipal politics with the casual ease of someone who has been doing it so long that it has become reflexive. He schemes in ways that require not just intelligence but patience, the kind of long-term planning that assumes a future far beyond what most people allow themselves to assume. His physical body is frail. His strength is minimal. He can be knocked over by a child. His posture has collapsed with age in ways that suggest his skeletal structure has been deteriorating for a very long time. But his mind is sharp. His memory is extraordinary. His capacity for strategic malice is undiminished. How does that happen? How does a man maintain the cognitive function required to run a corporation, manipulate a town, and sustain a century-long campaign of industrial exploitation while his body visibly ages into something that barely holds itself upright? The show answers this directly, in the Springfield Files episode that we discussed in connection with the radiation theory. Burns undergoes a weekly medical regimen. The treatment is so chemically and radiologically intensive that it causes his body to emit a visible green glow for hours afterward. It keeps him alive for exactly one more week. Miss a treatment, and Burns does not decline. He does not gradually worsen, he dies. The margin for error is zero. His life is maintained the way you maintain machinery, through scheduled servicing, through regular intervention of a specific and non-negotiable kind. Burns's biology has been so thoroughly altered by whatever has happened to his body over the course of his century-plus of existence that it can no longer sustain itself through the normal cellular processes that keep human beings alive. He requires external intervention. He requires the artificial management of a biological system that has stopped being self-sufficient. And the intervention involves radiation. Of course it does. The man whose nuclear plant has been leaking radioactive material into Springfield's water supply for decades, the man whose industrial operation has altered the biology of every organism within its contamination zone, is personally dependent on controlled radiation exposure to stay alive. Burns is not profiting from radiation at arm's length. He is powered by it. His body has been saturated with it for so long, and has adapted to it so thoroughly that it can no longer sustain its own cellular functions without a regular radioactive input. Take away the radiation and Burns's biological equilibrium collapses. He has essentially become a walking reactor, a biological system that requires the same energy source to function that it has been emitting into the environment for decades. The irony is so precise it almost feels constructed. The man who poisons Springfield with radiation is the man who needs radiation to survive. The contamination that is slowly altering everyone else in the town is the same substance that is actively keeping Burns alive. The Three Stooges syndrome scene elaborates on this in ways that repay close attention. In one of the show's most quoted moments, Burns visits a doctor who informs him that he has, simultaneously, every disease known to medical science. Not some diseases, every disease, simultaneously. The doctor describes how all of these conditions coexist within Burns's body, each one present and active, none of them progressing to the point of causing death. The explanation provided is that the diseases exist in a state of perfect equilibrium. They are all fighting each other, all competing for the same physiological territory. And because they are all equally matched, none of them can gain dominance. The doctor compares it to three people trying to get through a doorway at once. None of them gets through because they are all blocking each other. The conclusion, played entirely for laughs in the episode, is that Burns is the sickest man in the United States and also functionally indestructible because everything that should kill him is being prevented from killing him by everything else that should kill him. This sounds absurd as a biological concept, and it is, medically speaking, fantastical. But if you accept the framework that the radiation theory provides that Burns's weekly treatments are not curing his diseases but managing them, keeping each pathological process in a state of suspended animation through ongoing radioactive intervention, then the Three Stooges syndrome is not a joke about an impossibly sick old man. It is a clinical description of what it looks like when nuclear maintenance protocols are the only thing preventing total systemic collapse. Burns's body is a reactor in a critical state. The weekly treatments are the equivalent of adjusting the control rods. They do not fix the underlying condition. They prevent any single element of that condition from destabilizing the whole system. Without them, the equilibrium collapses, and everything that has been held in check simultaneously surges forward and overwhelms whatever remaining biological integrity Burns still possesses. Smithers's role in this context becomes profoundly different from the one the show presents on the surface. The show depicts Smithers as Burns's devoted personal assistant, a man whose loyalty borders on the obsessive and whose emotional attachment to Burns constitutes the most significant relationship in his life. The surface reading is that Smithers loves Burns, perhaps in ways that the show has always implied without ever fully articulating, and this love explains his decades of total dedication. The coma theory does not require you to discard this reading, but the radiation theory adds a layer underneath it that changes its texture. Smithers manages Burns's treatment schedule. Smithers ensures Burns attends every weekly appointment. Smithers monitors Burns's physical condition with a vigilance that goes beyond ordinary professional care. Multiple episodes have established that if Smithers were ever removed from his position, fired, retired, or otherwise separated from Burns, Burns would be helpless within days. Not emotionally helpless, physically helpless. Without Smithers managing the logistics of his survival, Burns would miss a treatment. The equilibrium would destabilize. The diseases would surge. And the machinery of wealth and infrastructure that Burns has spent a century building would lose the one thing it cannot replace: the consciousness that assembled it. Smithers knows this. He knows it with the kind of intimacy that comes from decades of proximity to a system he understands better than anyone else in the world, possibly including Burns himself. And this knowledge is not just the foundation of his professional role. It is the foundation of the entire relationship. Smithers's devotion is genuine, but it is also a form of recognition. He knows that he is the only thing standing between Burns and the death that the rest of the world's biology has not been able to deliver. That knowledge creates a bond unlike any other human relationship, because there is no other human relationship in which one person's continued presence is literally all that separates the other person from immediate death. Smithers is not just Burns's assistant, he is Burns's life support system, and he knows it, and Burns knows it, and neither of them has ever said this out loud, which may be the most honest silence in the whole show. Burns's connection to historical events adds another dimension to the immortality question, one that the show gestures toward without ever developing into a full story. Burns has interacted with or directly referenced an astonishing range of historical events and figures. He knew Howard Hughes. He attended Yale. He worked alongside or adjacent to figures from the early 20th century. He has described his family's wealth and influence as predating the Industrial Revolution. The Burns dynasty, as depicted in various episode flashbacks and references, is one of the oldest continuously operating concentrations of wealth in American history. And this raises the question the show absolutely never addresses. Burns is not the first Burns. The family has existed for generations, maintaining its wealth and influence for what the show implies is centuries. If the current Burns has been alive for well over 100 years through artificial means, through medical intervention, through radiation management, through infrastructure specifically designed to sustain his biological function, what did previous generations of the Burns family do? Before nuclear radiation, before modern medicine, Before the technology that currently keeps Charles Burns alive, what methods did his predecessors use to maintain the family's hold on power? The show does not say, but the continuity of a dynasty across centuries without the kind of generational succession that normally characterizes even the most enduring family dynasties implies either extraordinary luck or extraordinary measures. The Burns family has been maintaining something that most families cannot maintain across 2 or 3 generations, let alone 10 or 15. That kind of continuity does not emerge from ordinary human effort. It requires either institutional memory so robust that it compensates for the limitations of individual human lifespans, or individual lifespans that are themselves not limited in the ordinary way. Burns has survived things that should have killed him many times over. He was shot by a baby and survived it. He has been hospitalized dozens of times. He has collapsed, been abandoned in wilderness, been attacked, been poisoned. Every time, the machinery of his survival, his money, his connections, his private medical infrastructure, the network of loyalty and obligation he has spent a century building reassembles him. Not because Burns is physically resilient the way Homer is physically resilient. Homer survives because the show needs him to survive. Burns survives because he has spent his entire impossibly long life constructing systems whose purpose is to ensure his survival regardless of what happens to his physical form. Homer's immortality is passive. It happens to him. Burns's immortality is engineered. It is something he has built, maintained, paid for, and defended across a timescale that no other character in Springfield can conceive of. Every dollar he has ever spent, every institution he has corrupted, every politician he has purchased, every doctor he has retained, and every treatment he has undergone, all of it serves a single operational purpose. Keep the reactor running. Keep the diseases balanced. Keep the man alive. The scariest implication of all of this is the one about Springfield itself. The town cannot kill Burns, and it cannot survive without him. The nuclear power plant provides Springfield's electricity. Burns owns the plant. The treatments that keep Burns alive are funded by the income the plant generates. The town's economic infrastructure is dependent on the plant's continued operation. The plant's continued operation is dependent on Burns's continued existence. Burns's continued existence is dependent on treatments funded by the plant. It is a closed loop, a self-sustaining system where the man, the machine, and the money feed each other in an endless cycle. If Burns dies, the loop breaks. The plant enters a succession crisis. The town's economy, which is overwhelmingly dependent on the plant's employment base and operational infrastructure, destabilizes. The contaminated water keeps flowing, but there is no longer anyone managing the contamination with enough resources to keep it from becoming catastrophic, rather than merely chronic. Springfield cannot kill Burns because killing Burns would mean facing everything that Burns's money and influence have been quietly managing for them. The hidden infrastructure, the suppressed violations, the three-eyed fish, and the cracked cooling towers, and the human bones in the basement, and everything else that Burns's continued operation of the plant has kept invisible. Burns is not immortal. He is too expensive to die. And Springfield will keep paying the bill, whether it knows it is paying or not, for as long as the treatments hold and the reactor runs, and Smithers shows up every week to make sure the appointment is kept, which, if history is any guide, will be forever. Number Section 5. Maggie Simpson, the quiet apex. She is 1 year old. She has been 1 year old for 36 years. She has never spoken more than a handful of words across 780 episodes. She communicates primarily through the sound of her pacifier and the particular quality of her gaze, an expression that sits somewhere between infant blankness and a precision that has no business existing behind eyes that young. She is by any surface reading the least consequential member of her family. She cannot walk reliably. She cannot speak. She cannot, by any conventional measure, participate in the world around her at the level her family inhabits. She is a baby. She sits in her high chair and watches the chaos that constitutes daily life in the Simpson household, and she does not comment. She also shot a billionaire, led a rebellion, saved her family from multiple life-threatening crises, demonstrated problem-solving abilities that repeatedly exceed those of adults with decades of experience, and tested, in at least one canonical episode, at an intelligence level that standardized measurements cannot accurately quantify. Maggie Simpson is the most powerful person in Springfield. She just has not decided what to do about it yet. And the theory about why she has not decided is the most quietly disturbing thing in the entire show. Let's begin with the shooting, because it is the anchor for everything else. We examined the who shot Mr. Burns mystery in detail in the last section. Whether or not Maggie actually fired the gun and the evidence, as we established, is considerably murkier than the official verdict suggests. The aftermath of the shooting tells us something critical about Maggie's character and awareness. After Burns recovers and identifies her as the shooter, Chief Wiggum notes, as we discussed, that no jury in the world would convict a baby. The investigation closes, the family goes home, the case is settled. And in the final shot of that episode, Maggie is alone in the room. Everyone else has left. She looks around slowly, deliberately checking every angle. She confirms that no one is watching her. And then, she moves her pacifier in a motion that mimics pulling a trigger. The show frames this as a punchline, the adorable confirmation that yes, the baby did it, isn't that funny, isn't that cute. But watch the sequence again and set aside the framing. A 1-year-old child has just checked her surroundings for witnesses before performing a covert gesture that recalls a violent act she was either involved in or observed. The sequence of actions required for this moment is perceive the social situation, assess the risk of being observed, confirm safety, and only then produce the behavior she wants to produce. That sequence requires situational awareness, threat assessment, caution, and impulse control in service of secrecy. These are not traits associated with infants at any developmental stage. They are traits associated with someone who understands that certain behaviors carry consequences and that managing the perception of others is important. Maggie, in that final shot, is either confessing in private what she cannot acknowledge in public, or she is replaying a memory of something significant. Either way, she is exhibiting cognition that should not exist in a 1-year-old. But the most extensive evidence for Maggie's extraordinary intelligence is not in that final scene. It is in a theatrical short film from 2012 called The Longest Daycare. The film, 7 minutes long, was screened in cinemas before Ice Age, Continental Drift, and was nominated for an Academy Award. Its premise is simple. Maggie is dropped off at a daycare center operated with the kind of authoritarian efficiency that the show often associates with institutions that have lost sight of the humans they are supposed to serve. Inside the facility, Maggie discovers a caterpillar about to transform into a butterfly. She wants to protect it. Another baby, Gerald, the baby with the monobrow who has been Maggie's nemesis since the show's earliest seasons, wants to destroy it. What follows is a miniature action thriller in which Maggie systematically outmaneuvers the bully, the daycare staff, and the facility's entire security apparatus to save the butterfly. She does all of this without making a sound, and the cognition she displays in the process is genuinely astonishing when you look at it carefully. She reads the environment. She identifies threats and obstacles. She develops multi-step strategies in real time, adjusting them when circumstances change. She predicts the behavior of other people, both the baby bully and the adult staff members, accurately enough to plan around their movements and reactions. She executes plans that require precise timing, spatial reasoning, and the ability to improvise when something goes wrong. She succeeds. She is constrained by the motor development of a 1-year-old. She falls. She crawls when she needs to run. Her body cannot keep pace with her mind, but her mind compensates for every physical limitation. Every decision she makes is correct. Every adaptation is optimal. She is operating with cognitive tools that her physical age cannot explain. The show has tested Maggie's intelligence directly on multiple occasions, and the results, while inconsistent across individual episodes, as tends to happen with a floating timeline and rotating writers, point consistently in the same direction, off the charts, beyond the range of standardized measurement. The show plays these moments for quick laughs and then moves on, but the pattern accumulates into something unmistakable. Maggie is not a normal baby with a pacifier. Maggie is an extraordinary intelligence constrained by an infant body and choosing, deliberately and strategically, to let everyone around her believe she is exactly what she appears to be. The key word there is choosing. And to understand why Maggie might choose to remain invisible, you have to look at what she has observed in the household she has grown up in. Lisa Simpson is brilliant. This is established canon. Lisa is a saxophone prodigy, an intellectual, a moral philosopher in the making, a child whose cognitive gifts are genuinely exceptional and widely acknowledged within the show's universe. And what has Lisa's visible intelligence cost her? Almost everything. Lisa is isolated. Her intelligence separates her from her classmates, who find her exhausting. It separates her from her family, who love her but cannot follow her thinking. It separates her from the community of Springfield, which is constitutionally hostile to anything that challenges its comfortable mediocrity. Lisa's brilliance is her defining characteristic, and Springfield's response to that characteristic is relentless and varied suppression. She speaks and is ignored. She advocates and is dismissed. She fights for recognition and receives, in return, mostly resistance. Her intelligence is her greatest gift and the source of her deepest loneliness, because the world she lives in does not want what she has to offer. Maggie has watched this happen every day of her life. Maggie has observed, with the precise and unbiased attention that only a prelinguistic child can bring to observation, what happens to intelligence when it is displayed openly in Springfield. She has seen what happens to Lisa. She has watched the smartest member of her family fight every single day for recognition and receive in return mostly resistance and loneliness. She has registered the lesson that the household and the town around it teach repeatedly. Visibility is vulnerability. Being seen as exceptional makes you a target. Being underestimated makes you powerful. And she has reached a conclusion, the opposite of the one Lisa reached. Lisa's response to being exceptional, in a world that does not value exceptionalism, is to keep fighting anyway, to keep speaking, keep advocating, keep demanding to be recognized regardless of the resistance. This is admirable. It is also, as the show repeatedly demonstrates, painful and largely ineffective within the specific ecosystem of Springfield. Maggie's response is silence. Deliberate, strategic, sustained silence. If the world underestimates you, let it underestimate you. Use the underestimation as cover. Move through the space that other people have emptied out around you because they do not think you are worth watching, and act in that space without interruption. The less they notice you, the more freedom you have to do exactly what you want to do. And it has worked perfectly. Burns was shot. The investigation focused on Homer, then on every other Springfield adult with a motive, before landing on Maggie, and when it landed on Maggie, the case closed immediately, because babies are legally unconvictable. The perfect outcome for the shooter, if the shooter was someone who wanted to avoid consequence. The daycare rebellion succeeded because adults simply do not surveil infants closely enough to perceive them organizing. Every time Maggie has demonstrated extraordinary capability, it has happened in spaces and moments where the adults around her were looking elsewhere. She has ensured that the adults look elsewhere by maintaining the most effective disguise available to her. She performs infancy. She is the baby. She sits in the high chair and sucks the pacifier and falls over when she tries to walk and makes the sounds that babies make. She is exactly what everyone expects her to be, and because she is exactly what everyone expects her to be, nobody looks for anything more. Behind the pacifier, behind the large dark eyes, behind 36 years of deliberate performed helplessness, something is watching. Something is cataloging. Something is maintaining a sustained, strategic observation of a family and a town and a world, waiting for a moment that has not yet arrived. And this connects to the radiation theory in a way that deepens both. If the nuclear contamination is altering the biology of Springfield's residents in ways that express differently in different individuals, if radiation does not produce a single uniform mutation, but a spectrum of alterations, that interact with individual biology in unique ways, then Homer and Maggie represent two possible extremes of the same environmental cause. Homer's exposure, over decades of working directly adjacent to an active reactor, combined with a physical brain obstruction and a family history of living in the contamination zone, has produced a severe reduction in cognitive function. His IQ is clinically deficient. His reasoning is impaired. His capacity for sustained abstract thought is limited. The radiation took something away from Homer's brain. Maggie, born to parents already long saturated in the same environment, gestated in a contaminated biological system, raised in the same irradiated air and water, has experienced the same environmental cause, producing an opposite biological effect. The mutation amplified her cognitive function rather than diminishing it. It gave her something. Homer and Maggie are not just siblings separated by age. They are biological expressions of the same radioactive cause, bent in opposite directions by whatever combination of factors determines which way the mutation goes. He is what the contamination takes. She is what it gives. And neither of them will ever be able to have the conversation that might illuminate what connects them, because Homer is not cognitively equipped to have it, and Maggie has chosen not to speak. Through the coma theory, Maggie's genius takes on a texture that is both beautiful and heartbreaking. If every episode is Homer's dream, if Springfield is an unconscious man's reconstruction of everything he loves, maintained in perfect amber while he lies in a hospital bed, then Maggie's extraordinary capability is not a mutation or a theory. It is a father's hope. Homer cannot see his youngest child grow. He cannot watch her develop or learn or become who she will become. He cannot hear her first real sentences or see her walk confidently or know what kind of person she is growing into while he sleeps. So, the dream makes her extraordinary from the start. It gives her an intelligence that needs no development because it arrived fully formed. It makes her capable of anything, prepared for anything, protected from anything, because Homer needs to believe that his youngest child will be safe even in his absence, even without him there. Her genius, in this reading, is not a mutation. It is a father's prayer dreamed into a baby's eyes. But Maggie Simpson, the real one, if there is a real one, the one who exists in Springfield's actual waking continuity, independent of all theories and all dreams, has been waiting for 36 years. She has been watching and cataloging and saying nothing. And the show has never told us what she is waiting for. The question of Maggie's endgame is the last genuinely unsolved mystery of the Simpson family. And it is unsolved not because there are no clues, but because the clues all point in the same direction. Whatever Maggie is going to do, she will do it on her own terms, at a time of her choosing, in a way that no one sees coming. Because that is how Maggie has always operated. She acts when no one is looking. She succeeds precisely because everyone underestimates her. She is the most capable person on Evergreen Terrace, and she has spent 3.5 decades making sure nobody figures that out. When she finally moves, when the pacifier drops, and the silence breaks, and Maggie Simpson reveals what she has been building toward across all of those years of quiet watching, Springfield will not see it coming. That is, as she designed it, entirely the point. Number. Section 6. The Simpsons Predictions. How a Cartoon Writes the Future. Here is something that sounds like a conspiracy, but turns out to be more interesting than any conspiracy could be. The Simpsons has spent 36 years apparently predicting the future. And the truth about how it does this, or rather, the truth about what it actually reveals about the relationship between popular culture and reality, is stranger and more unsettling than either the believers or the skeptics in this particular debate have fully reckoned with. Let's start with the big ones. In the year 2000, the show aired an episode called Bart to the Future. The premise involves Bart receiving a vision of his adult life, and embedded within that vision is a glimpse of a future United States in which Lisa Simpson has become the country's first female president. Her predecessor in the Oval Office is identified, in the episode, as Donald Trump. The episode aired in March 2000. Donald Trump did not win the presidency until November 2016. The gap between the joke and the reality is 16 years. When the 2016 election happened, the clip from Bart to the Future circulated across social media with a velocity that reflected genuine cultural shock. Screenshots of The Simpsons joke about President Trump were shared millions of times. News organizations covered the apparent prediction. The phrase, "The Simpsons predicted it," entered the cultural lexicon in a way that attached to the show more durably than almost any other claim made about it. And that was just the opening. The list of apparent predictions goes on at some length. A 1,995 episode depicted what appears to be a smartwatch, a wrist-mounted communication device decades before wearable computing technology became a consumer reality. A 1,994 episode showed Homer traveling to space alongside Buzz Aldrin, anticipating commercial space tourism by approximately 2 decades. A 1,998 episode featured Homer stumbling across a mathematical equation that, when examined by actual mathematicians after the fact, appears to anticipate the mass of the Higgs boson particle, which was not experimentally confirmed until 2012. A 1,999 episode had Homer theorizing that the universe might be shaped like a donut, a toroidal structure years before cosmologists began finding radiation pattern evidence, suggesting the universe may indeed be non-standard in its shape. A 1993 episode called Marge in Chains depicted a flu virus originating in Asia spreading to Springfield, causing mass panic, supply shortages, and a frantic communal search for a cure. The episode aired 27 years before COVID-19, and in that same episode, during the chaos of the fictional outbreak, the town accidentally releases a swarm of killer bees, which took on an eerie resonance when Asian giant hornets, dubbed murder hornets by the media, showed up in the United States during the actual 2020 pandemic. In 1996, an episode called Homerpalooza featured a throwaway joke about the hip-hop group Cypress Hill accidentally booking the London Symphony Orchestra while under the influence. In 2024, 28 years later, Cypress Hill performed with the London Symphony Orchestra at the Royal Albert Hall. The joke became a documented fact 28 years after it was made. In 1998, the show depicted the Walt Disney Company acquiring 20th Century Fox, a media consolidation that was, in the show, played as satirical exaggeration of corporate monopoly. In 2019, Disney completed its acquisition of 21st Century Fox. The merger the show mocked as an absurdist joke became the legal and financial reality of the entertainment landscape. Multiple episodes across various seasons depicted video calling technology, autocorrect failures on mobile devices, and surveillance culture in contexts that anticipated those technologies' actual development and integration into daily life by years and sometimes decades. The pattern, once you start looking for it, appears overwhelming. The show has apparently foreseen presidential elections, scientific discoveries, corporate mergers, technological developments, health crises, and specific, datable real-world events. The internet's conclusion from all of this is that The Simpsons must have some special access to information about the future that ordinary human observation does not provide. The people who actually make the show have a different and considerably more deflating explanation. Al Jean, the show's longtime executive producer, has addressed the prediction phenomenon directly and repeatedly. His explanation is blunt, to the point of being almost deliberately unsatisfying. Throw enough darts at a large enough target for long enough, and some of them will hit the center. That is it. Volume plus time equals some number of apparent hits. The Simpsons has produced nearly 800 episodes over 36 years. Each episode contains dozens of jokes, satirical observations, and speculative premises. When you generate that quantity of creative output about American culture and technology and politics over that length of time, some portion of it will align with future events through sheer statistical probability. Producer Bill Oakley, who ran the show during several of its peak creative seasons, put the same point more specifically. Most of what looks like prediction is actually the repetitive nature of history. The episodes are old enough that cultural patterns have had time to cycle back around. Something that seemed like satire in 1993 has had 20-plus years to find a real-world analog, and when it does, the hit gets remembered while the dozens of predictions that went nowhere disappear from the cultural conversation entirely. Fact-checking organizations have been making the same point for years. Many of the most widely shared apparent predictions fall apart on close examination. The show did not predict a Trump presidency in the visionary sense. It observed, in 2000, that Trump had been publicly flirting with running for political office since the late 1980s, and it made a joke about the logical extreme of a culture that increasingly conflates celebrity with authority. The joke was not prophecy. It was trend extrapolation. The writers saw where the line was heading and extended it forward a few steps. The show did not predict the Disney-Fox merger. It observed in 1998 that media consolidation was an accelerating structural tendency of the entertainment industry and made a satirical observation about its probable endpoint. When the endpoint eventually arrived, it confirmed the observation. It did not validate a supernatural vision. The Simpsons writing staff, historically, has been among the most academically credentialed in American television. Multiple writers hold degrees from Harvard, Yale, and other highly selective institutions. Several have backgrounds in mathematics, computer science, political theory, and philosophy. These are not people making random guesses. They are sophisticated, well-read observers of American culture, trained in disciplines that develop the capacity to identify underlying patterns and extrapolate trends. They do not predict the future. They read the present more carefully than most people do, and they push what they see forward to its logical conclusion. This is a legitimate and underappreciated form of intellectual work, and when it produces accurate results, when the extrapolation lands near the actual outcome, it can look indistinguishable from prediction. But the mechanism is observation and reasoning, not prophecy. The confirmation bias problem amplifies all of this enormously. The internet remembers the hits and forgets the misses. Thousands of Simpsons predictions have not come true. Jokes about jetpacks and moon colonies and specific political outcomes that went differently. Characters and technologies and cultural moments that the show envisioned and that simply did not materialize in the way the show imagined. Nobody screenshots those. Nobody shares them. Nobody builds viral posts around the times The Simpsons got it wrong, because confirmation bias only operates in one direction. The mechanism that makes the hit clips go viral does not extend to the miss clips. The misses simply disappear, and the hits accumulate into a highlight reel that looks, when viewed in isolation, like something miraculous. But here is where the analysis needs to go further. Because while the debunking explains most of the predictions, it does not explain all of them. Some of the alignments are specific enough, detailed enough, precise enough, that statistical probability and trend extrapolation do not quite close the gap. The Trump episode did not just predict that a celebrity might one day run for president. It named Trump. It showed a specific visual moment, Trump descending an escalator, that mirrors in striking detail the actual moment Trump used to announce his 2016 campaign. Trend extrapolation explains the general premise. It struggles with the specificity of the visual. The Siegfried and Roy episode did not just make a joke about dangerous animals. It depicted, specifically, a white tiger attacking one of two flamboyant performers in a way that closely mirrors the 2003 incident in which Roy Horn was critically injured by one of the act's white tigers. These are not vague directional gestures. They are specific depictions that align with specific real events in ways that probability alone can only partially account for. And this is where the meta theory becomes more interesting than any conspiracy about time travel or clairvoyance. The Simpsons does not predict the future. The Simpsons shapes the future, not through magic, through cultural influence. The Simpsons is one of the most watched, most quoted, most embedded pieces of American media in history. It has been running for longer than most of its current audience has been alive. Its observations have become part of how Americans understand their own culture. Its jokes have entered the lexicon in ways that make them unavoidable as reference points for anyone who grew up watching the show, which is to say, nearly everyone who has passed through American pop culture in the last 35 years. When the show makes a joke about Trump becoming president, that joke does not simply reflect a cultural tendency. It enters the cultural bloodstream and becomes a reference point. Millions of people see it. It becomes something they say at parties, something they think about when they see Trump on the news, something that makes the idea of a Trump presidency feel familiar rather than shocking. The joke does not predict the future. It normalizes a potential future. It makes one possible outcome feel more plausible, more inevitable, more like something that was always going to happen rather than something genuinely unprecedented. When that outcome arrives, the cultural response is not shock. It is recognition. We have seen this before. The Simpsons already told us this would happen. The show becomes the reference frame through which the event is understood, which reinforces both the show's apparent predictive capacity and the sense that the event was somehow predetermined. The same mechanism applies to the Disney acquisition, to the Cypress Hill collaboration, to dozens of other apparently prophetic moments. The Simpsons satirized a thing. The satire became a reference point. The reference point shaped how people thought about the thing. When the thing happened, the satire felt like foresight, but the satire did not foresee the thing. The satire became part of the cultural context within which the thing occurred. The show and reality entered a feedback loop, each one shaping the other, each one reflecting the other, until the distinction between prediction and influence became genuinely hard to locate. Springfield does not reflect America. America has become Springfield. The show held up a satirical mirror for 36 years, and we looked into it so consistently and with such attention that we began to resemble what we saw: the corrupt billionaire, the incompetent government, the population too distracted and too cognitively worn down to notice how thoroughly it is being exploited, the endless cycle of catastrophe and reset, the collective amnesia that allows the same mistakes to keep happening without consequence. These are not predictions of where America was heading. They are a diagnosis of where America already was when the show began. The show just documented it with enough specificity and sustained attention that when reality confirmed the diagnosis, it felt like prophecy rather than observation. And this brings us to the final, most unsettling dimension of the prediction phenomenon. The Simpsons has also made jokes that have not come true, thousands of them. Some of the show's most ambitious satirical premises, specific technologies, political outcomes, cultural developments, have not materialized. The jetpacks never arrived. Certain political futures that the show imagined in detail have not come to pass. Specific social changes the show envisioned with apparent confidence have not happened. Nobody discusses those. Nobody shares them. The mechanism that makes the hits go viral does not operate in reverse, and this creates an asymmetry in the cultural record around the show's apparent predictive capacity that is itself worth examining. We are not perceiving the show's actual hit rate. We are perceiving a curated selection of the show's hits, filtered through a technology, social media that is specifically designed to amplify content that produces emotional impact and suppress content that does not. The viral clips are not an accurate census of The Simpsons' predictive accuracy. They are a highlight reel assembled by confirmation bias. And the highlight reel looks like prophecy because that is what highlight reels are designed to look like. The truth is more modest and more interesting. 800 episodes, 36 years. Thousands of satirical observations about the trajectory of American culture. Brilliant, highly educated writers who read the present more carefully than almost anyone else in their field. A social media ecosystem that amplifies the hits and absorbs the misses. And a cultural influence so deep and so pervasive that the show has become part of the context within which the future unfolds. Put all of those things together, and you get a show that appears to predict the future with uncanny frequency. The appearance is partly statistical, partly the result of extraordinary creative intelligence, partly the product of a cultural feedback loop that the show helped create, and partly, just maybe, something that even the show's own creators are not entirely sure how to explain. Because even knowing how the trick works, even understanding the mechanism when a clip from 1997 lines up perfectly with a headline from 2026, you still feel something. You still have the sensation of having been shown something before it happened. That feeling is real, even if the explanation for it is not supernatural. And The Simpsons, for 36 years, has been producing that feeling in its audience more reliably than any other piece of television ever made. That is worth sitting with. Number. Section 7. Mona Simpson and the Three-Generation Conspiracy. For the first 6 seasons of The Simpsons, Homer's mother was dead. This was the established, accepted fact of the show's backstory. Abe Simpson, Homer's father, had told him that his mother passed away when Homer was young. He had shown Homer a grave. Homer had mourned. He had grown up carrying the weight of maternal loss, and that loss had shaped him in ways the show depicted with more care than it usually gave to backstory. Homer's desperate need for approval makes immediate sense against the background of growing up without a mother. His terror of abandonment, his clinginess toward Marge, his willingness to absorb humiliation and degradation from his employer rather than risk the loss of the stability his family represents. All of these character traits read as coping mechanisms for someone who lost a parent at a formative age and spent the rest of his life overcompensating for the hole that left. Homer Simpson's entire emotional architecture is a response to maternal loss. His neediness, his insecurity, his compulsive need to be liked by everyone, even people who treat him badly. His inability to leave the nuclear plant despite decades of indignity, because leaving the plant would mean risking the one thing he has managed to build for himself, the family that makes the loss bearable. And then Season 7 revealed that the loss was a lie. The episode is called Mother Simpson. It aired in November of 1995, and it is widely regarded as one of the finest episodes in the series' history. The premise begins simply enough. Homer fakes his own death to avoid working on a Saturday. His scheme results in the town officially declaring him dead, and when Marge insists he go to the Hall of Records and correct the administrative error, Homer discovers something in the municipal records that changes his understanding of his own life. His mother is alive. She has always been alive. The grave Abe showed him the grave Homer visited and mourned over and used as the anchor for his understanding of himself as a motherless son belongs to Walt Whitman, the poet. Abe Simpson spent the entirety of his son's childhood and adolescence pointing at a famous literary figure's headstone and calling it his wife's. Homer finds Mona at a cemetery. She is visiting what she believes is her son's grave. She has heard the false news of Homer's death and come to mourn. The reunion that follows is one of the show's most genuinely moving sequences. A grown man and the mother he believed was dead, finding each other beside a headstone that belongs to neither of them, separated by 27 years of lies, maintained by the man who should have been protecting both of them. And then Mona explains why she left. In 1969, Mona Simpson was a housewife, married to Abe, mother of a young Homer, living an ordinary life in Springfield, while the world outside was burning through the civil rights movement, the counterculture, the protests against Vietnam. The show depicts her radicalization with both absurdity and genuine emotional weight. She joined a group of activists who had identified and targeted a biological weapons laboratory owned by Mr. Burns. Let that settle for a moment. Burns did not just own a nuclear power plant. He owned a germ warfare facility, a laboratory designed and operated for the production of weaponized biological agents located in Springfield, the same town where he would later build a nuclear reactor with 342 safety violations. Burns was manufacturing weapons-grade pathogens in the community where Homer Simpson was growing up, where families were living their daily lives without any awareness that the richest man in town was cooking up diseases in a lab down the road. Mona and her group broke into the lab. They detonated what the show describes as an antibiotic bomb, destroying the biological materials stored inside. During the raid, they accidentally cured the asthma of the facility's security guard, who happened to be Clancy Wiggum, the man who would later become Springfield's chief of police. The raid succeeded. The weapons were destroyed. But Mona made one mistake. As the group fled, she stopped to help someone who had fallen in the chaos. That someone was Mr. Burns. She stopped to assist the man whose weapons she had just destroyed, and Burns saw her face clearly enough to identify her. He reported her to the FBI. From that moment forward, Mona Simpson was a federal fugitive. She could not go home. She could not contact her family. She could not hold her son or explain why she was leaving. She kissed Homer goodbye while he was sleeping and disappeared into the night. For 27 years, Homer woke up and his mother was gone. Abe told him she was dead. And Homer spent the next 3 decades believing he was the kind of son whose mother would rather disappear than stay. That there was something wrong with him that made people leave. That love was always conditional and always temporary and always eventually going to abandon him. None of that was true. His mother loved him completely. She left to protect him. And the man who forced her out was the same man Homer would grow up to work for, every day, for his entire adult life. Now here is where the conspiracy takes its shape. Burns did not just identify Mona to the FBI and move on. He pursued her. Actively. For decades. Burns held a personal grudge against a woman who destroyed his biological weapons program, and he used his resources, his connections, his influence, his money to ensure she could never safely return to her family. The grudge was not strategic, it was personal. Burns is a man who remembers every slight and every opposition for as long as he lives, and Burns, as we have discussed, lives a very long time. When Mona returns to Springfield in Season 7, Burns spots her through a cab window and immediately alerts the authorities. The FBI descends on the Simpson house. Mona has to run again. Homer has to say goodbye to his mother for the second time, and this time he understands exactly why. This time he knows who forced her out. This time he can see the line connecting the man who signs his paychecks to the man who stole his childhood. And he does nothing with this knowledge. He does not confront Burns. He does not quit his job. He does not even seem to fully integrate the connection between the billionaire who destroyed his family and the billionaire who employs him. The show does not play Homer's failure to act as a joke. It plays it as tragedy. Because Homer's inability to connect those dots is not a character flaw in the conventional sense. It is a symptom. The same contamination that mutated his body has diminished his capacity for the kind of sustained analytical reasoning that would allow him to perceive the architecture of his own suffering. Burns broke Homer before Homer was old enough to understand what was happening. And the broken version of Homer that resulted from that childhood trauma is exactly the kind of employee Burns has always needed. Think about what Burns required for the nuclear plant to continue operating without regulatory interference. He needed a safety inspector who would not notice violations, who would not report problems, Who would not, through the simple application of professional competence, shut down an illegal operation? A competent safety inspector would have closed the plant within weeks. An incompetent one would allow it to keep running indefinitely. And an incompetent safety inspector who is also emotionally dependent on his job, who is too terrified of abandonment and financial instability to risk his position, who is too cognitively compromised to connect the dots about what his employer is doing to his community, is the ideal candidate for the role. Homer was shaped into that candidate before he was old enough to resist being shaped. The conspiracy goes deeper still. The show reveals in a later season that Burns and Grandpa Simpson struck a deal. Burns had committed a crime. The specific crime has been stated and implied across various episodes with some inconsistency, but the essential structure is clear and Grandpa discovered it. In exchange for Grandpa's silence, Burns guaranteed Homer a permanent position at the plant, protected from termination regardless of his performance. No matter how many mistakes Homer made, no matter how many documented failures accumulated, no matter how many times any other employer would have let him go, the deal protected him. This is why Homer was never permanently fired, not because Burns forgot who Homer was, not because the plant's management was too disorganized to enforce basic employment standards. Homer's job security was contractually guaranteed by a private agreement between his grandfather and his employer, brokered in secret, maintained in silence, and never communicated to Homer, because communicating it would mean communicating everything else. Everything else being, your grandmother drove Mona into exile. Your grandfather made a deal with the man who did it. The man who pays you every week is the man who took your mother away when you were 6 years old. Your job, your family's primary income, the stability that you have built your entire life around, is a contractual obligation between your grandfather and your mother's persecutor. Homer cannot know this because knowing it would require him to act on it, and acting on it would mean losing the one thing his psychological architecture cannot survive losing. His job at the plant is not just income. It is the deal. It is the proof that the arrangement made in his name, without his knowledge, by two men who were supposed to protect him, is still holding. And as long as it is holding, Homer is safe. As long as Burns needs the deal to stay quiet, Homer stays employed. And as long as Homer stays employed, his family stays housed and fed and together. Burns engineered this. He engineered all of it, not through a single calculated act, but through the cumulative effect of a series of decisions that each served his immediate interests while creating, across decades, a perfect trap. He identified Mona, he pursued her, he drove her into exile. He benefited from the psychological damage this inflicted on the 6-year-old Homer, who grew up into exactly the emotionally dependent, cognitively compromised, professionally inert employee Burns needed. He made a deal with Homer's grandfather that guaranteed access to that employee, and he ran the plant that poisoned the water that further compromised Homer's cognition, ensuring that Homer would never develop the analytical capacity to perceive what had been done to him. 3 generations of Simpsons, one man's grudge. Mona fought back and lost everything. Abe covered the truth and bargained with the enemy. Homer inherited the consequences and spent his adult life working for the man who created them, without ever fully understanding why his life felt like something was perpetually, fundamentally wrong with it. Mona Simpson died in a later episode. The death scene is one of the show's most quietly devastating moments. Homer sits beside her. He holds her hand. He watches the mother he barely knew slip away for the final time. There is no joke, no cutaway, no reset that restores her by the next scene. Just a man and his mother and the weight of 27 stolen years pressing down on both of them. The Simpsons is a comedy, it always has been. But underneath the comedy, underneath 36 seasons of Homer falling down and getting back up and strangling his son and eating donuts and stumbling through every conceivable catastrophe, there is a story about a family that was systematically dismantled by one man's power and one town's inability to resist it. Mona saw the machinery clearly enough to fight it. The machinery destroyed her for that. Abe saw it clearly enough to make terms with it. The terms protected his family at the cost of his integrity. Homer absorbed the consequences of both of those choices without ever being given the information that would have let him understand what he was living inside. And Burns won. Burns always wins. Because in Springfield, the man who controls the power controls everything that depends on power, and everything depends on power. Homer will work at the plant until he dies. He will work there because his grandfather made a deal, because his mother made a choice, Because the richest man in town needed a broken man in Sector 7G and went to the considerable trouble of producing one. Homer was broken before he ever clocked in for his first shift. The plant just kept him that way. Number, Section 8. Where is Springfield geographic impossibility and the town that cannot be found? Springfield is the most famous fictional address in American history. More people can name it than can name the capital of half the actual states in the country. It has a nuclear power plant and a tire fire, and a harbor, and a gorge, and a monorail, and a prison, and a quickie mart and mountains within driving distance, and an ocean within driving distance, and a desert and a forest and farmland, and a cliff from which Homer has fallen dozens of times without ever landing anywhere that the show subsequently acknowledges. It borders, depending on which episode you are watching, the states of Ohio, Nevada, Maine, and Kentucky. It is located on the coast. It is located in the heartland. It is near the Canadian border. It is near Mexico. Its climate ranges from severe blizzard conditions to tropical heat within the span of a single season. Lisa's area code at one point begins with 636, which is a Missouri exchange. The state abbreviation has appeared on screen as NT, which is not a real American state. Springfield does not exist in any single state because Springfield exists in all of them simultaneously. The show has been actively and deliberately contradicting itself about the town's geographic location for its entire 36-year run. Every time a clue appears that seems to narrow down the possibilities, a reference to a neighboring state, a climate detail, a distance calculation, another clue appears in a different episode that makes the previous one impossible to square with it. This is not accidental. The writers are not making mistakes. They are maintaining, with considerable care and evident intention, a geographic ambiguity that has become one of the show's most distinctive and most discussed characteristics. Matt Groening, the show's creator, seemed to resolve the mystery in 2012 when he told Smithsonian Magazine that Springfield was named after Springfield, Oregon, the city near where Groening grew up. He acknowledged this was the real-world inspiration for the name and the general sensibility of the place. For approximately 48 hours, the question was settled. Springfield was in Oregon. And then the show continued airing episodes that were geographically inconsistent with Oregon, and the writers continued placing Springfield in contradictory locations, and Groening's revelation turned out to be about inspiration rather than location, and the ambiguity resumed as if the interview had never happened. The mystery survived its apparent solution. It absorbed the answer and kept going, unchanged. The reason this has worked for 36 years is that the ambiguity is not a limitation of the show. It is one of its most sophisticated devices. A Springfield that could be in Oregon could also be in Ohio, or Alabama, or Connecticut, or any of the dozens of Springfields that exist in actual American geography. The town named Springfield is the most common city name in the United States. There are Springfields in nearly every state. By choosing a name that belongs everywhere, Groening created a setting that belongs to every viewer. Springfield feels like the town you grew up in, regardless of where you actually grew up, because it has been specifically designed to feel that way. It incorporates enough of the Rust Belt's industrial decay, the Midwest's cultural flatness, the Northeast's small-town insularity, and the Sun Belt's suburban sprawl that virtually every American can find something recognizable in it. The geographic impossibility, mountains and ocean and desert all within driving distance, is the physical expression of this design philosophy. Springfield contains all of America because Springfield is a distillation of all of America. It is not a real place. It is an idea of a place. The archetypal American community, assembled from the pieces of every American community, located nowhere specific because it is meant to be located everywhere general. This is the surface-level explanation, and the show's creators have confirmed it in various interviews. It is also genuinely true. Springfield's geographic universality is a deliberate creative choice that has served the show well for 3.5 decades. But the radiation theory proposes something additional, something that follows from taking the theory's core premise seriously. If the nuclear contamination has altered the biology of every organism within Springfield's contamination zone, if it has changed the structure of cells, the function of organs, the rates at which bodies heal and age and process the world around them, why should the physical geography be exempt? If the humans inside the dome look different from the humans outside it, if the fish in Springfield's rivers have developed extrasensory organs, If the rats in the plant's walls glow from the inside, why should we assume that the contamination stops at biological systems and does not extend to the physical landscape itself? Maybe Springfield has both mountains and ocean, because the contamination does not just affect biology, maybe it affects space. Maybe whatever the plant has been leaking into Springfield's environment for decades has done something to the physical laws governing that environment. Compressed geographic features that should be hundreds of miles apart into a single impossible region. Bent the rules of distance and topography the same way it has bent the rules of cellular biology. Made the town physically impossible in the same way it has made its residents biologically impossible. Springfield is a contamination zone. In a contamination zone, the normal rules do not apply. The show has told you this about the biology. Maybe the geography is part of the same story. The coma theory has its own answer. Homer's dreaming brain does not have a precise internal map of America. It has impressions of places. It has fragments of landscapes encountered in memory, in film, in television, in the accidental peripheral awareness of a life lived mostly within a few miles of Evergreen Terrace. Mountains from one vacation, ocean from a commercial, desert from a movie, forest from driving through the countryside. Homer's unconscious mind assembled Springfield from every American landscape he ever encountered and layered them without regard for geographic logic, because dreams do not have geographic logic. Dreams have emotional logic. They put things in the same place because they feel like they belong together, not because they geographically could be. Springfield feels like America because it is made from Homer's memory of America, which is scattered and incomplete and held together by longing rather than cartography. The principle and the Popper theory, which we will explore in detail in the next section, offers a third reading. Springfield's geographic ambiguity is a legal shield. You cannot bring federal charges against a nuclear power plant if you cannot determine what state it is in. You cannot enforce regulatory compliance if the jurisdiction keeps changing. You cannot hold anyone accountable for anything if the venue of the alleged offense is permanently undefined. Springfield floats between states because floating is safer than landing. Landing means jurisdiction. Landing means regulatory authority. Landing means a state attorney general who has both the mandate and the power to walk into the power plant with an enforcement notice and start asking the questions that 342 safety violations demand. By remaining unlocatable, Springfield remains unaccountable. The town is simultaneously in every state and subject to the full authority of none of them. And Burns, who has been managing regulatory exposure for over a century, understands this perfectly. A town that cannot be found cannot be held responsible, and a plant that cannot be definitively located cannot be definitively shut down. There is a beautiful moment in Season 12, in the episode Behind the Laughter, a mockumentary episode framed as a documentary about the Simpsons, as if they were a real family who had starred in a real television show. In this episode, Springfield's location is revealed explicitly. In the original broadcast, the family is identified as being from northern Kentucky, but in syndicated reruns of that same episode, the location was changed to a different state. The answer to the question literally changed depending on which version of the episode you were watching. The show gave you the truth, and then changed the truth based on the platform delivering it. Even when Springfield has a definitive answer, the answer is not definitive. It shifts. It revises itself. It refuses to stay fixed. The same way that everything in Springfield refuses to stay fixed, characters do not age, catastrophes do not stick, consequences do not accumulate, and the town's location does not remain determinable from one broadcast to the next. Springfield is not hiding its location. It is demonstrating what the show has been demonstrating for 36 years, that in Springfield, nothing is stable. Everything is subject to revision. The town maintains its existence through sustained ambiguity, rather than through fixed fact. And the ambiguity is not a failure of the show's world building. It is the world building. A town that can be anywhere is a town that belongs to everyone. A town that cannot be pinned to a map is a town that cannot be investigated by any authority empowered to investigate a specific geographic location. A town that exists everywhere and nowhere is a town that mirrors the experience of the audience watching it, because wherever you are watching from, Springfield feels like a place you could almost reach. A town just far enough outside your actual experience to be fictional, but close enough inside your cultural memory to feel like home. Springfield will never be found on a map. This is the correct and necessary outcome. Finding it would mean fixing it. Fixing it would mean making it real. And making it real would mean it stopped belonging to everyone and started belonging to somewhere specific. The mystery serves the show serves the mystery, and both of them serve the vast, geographically scattered, temporally diverse audience that has been trying to locate Springfield for 36 years, and will, the show seems to guarantee, keep trying for at least 36 more. Number, Section 9. The Principal and the Pauper, the Town That Made Truth Illegal. There is an episode of The Simpsons that fans have never forgiven the show for. Season 9, Episode 2, The Principal and the Pauper. It aired in September of 1997, and the backlash that followed its broadcast was immediate, sustained, and has never fully subsided. 28 years later, fans still cite this episode as a betrayal, as the moment the show stopped caring about its own continuity, as the point at which the writers demonstrated contempt for the audience by casually dismantling a beloved character's entire established history for the sake of a single episode's premise. Harry Shearer, who voices Principal Skinner as well as Burns, publicly stated his displeasure with the storyline. Critics argued that it was the worst decision in the show's history. It appears on nearly every list of the show's worst episodes. The consensus is that it represents something broken. But here is the argument that most of those critics have missed. The Principal and the Pauper is not the show's worst episode. It may be its most important one. And the reason it is the most important one is that it is the only episode in 36 seasons that shows you, in explicit mechanical detail, how Springfield actually works. Here is what happens. Springfield Elementary holds an event honoring Principal Seymour Skinner's 20 years of service to the school. The ceremony is underway when a stranger enters. He introduces himself as Sergeant Seymour Skinner, the real one, a decorated Vietnam War veteran who was captured as a prisoner of war, presumed dead, and has now returned after decades to find that someone else has been living his life. The man Springfield has known as Seymour Skinner is revealed to be an imposter. His real name is Armin Tamzarian. Before the war, Tamzarian was a street-level criminal with no family, no prospects, and no identity worth keeping. He was drafted. He served alongside the real Skinner. When Skinner was captured and presumed killed, Tamzarian felt responsible. He traveled to Springfield to deliver the news of Skinner's death to Skinner's mother, Agnes. When he arrived, Agnes assumed he was her son. He did not correct her, he let her believe. And then, because no one had ever wanted him before and because this woman needed him to be her son, he became Seymour Skinner. He assumed the name, the history, the relationships, the identity. He lived inside it for 20 years. He became the principal of Springfield Elementary. He became Agnes's son. He became, by any measure of sustained performance, Seymour Skinner. Until the real Seymour Skinner walked through the door. Springfield holds a meeting. Both men are present. The full truth is in the room. Everyone knows who Tamzarian is and who Skinner actually is. The deception is completely exposed. And now, Springfield has to decide what to do about it. The town votes, not on whether to prosecute Tamzarian for fraud, not on how to restore the real Skinner's identity, on whether to acknowledge the truth at all. The verdict is unanimous. Springfield votes to maintain the lie. Judge Snyder issues a legal decree declaring the imposter to be the real Skinner. The actual Seymour Skinner, the man whose identity was stolen, the war hero who survived imprisonment in Southeast Asia and came home to find his life occupied, is tied to a railroad car and physically expelled from Springfield. And the judge makes it explicitly illegal to ever mention the truth again, under penalty of torture. Fans hated this. They still hate it. The argument is that the episode destroyed a character by revealing that everything about him was a fiction, and then compounded the destruction by having the town vote to sustain the fiction rather than restore reality. It is, in this reading, a monument to lazy writing and contempt for continuity. But the episode is not lazy. The episode is honest. It is the most honest episode the show has ever made because it takes the mechanism by which Springfield operates and makes it visible. Every other time Springfield forgets a catastrophe, ignores a contradiction, or resets after something world-altering happens, the mechanism is invisible. It happens between episodes, off-screen, in the implied space between one story and the next. The slate wipes clean and nobody explains why. The Principal and the Pauper is the one episode where you watch the slate being wiped, where the town assembles in a room, looks at an inconvenient truth, votes to reject it, enshrines the rejection in law, and violently expels the inconvenient truth from the community. The mechanism is explicit. The vote is shown. The decree is read out. The man who carries the inconvenient truth in his person is physically removed and sent away. This is how Springfield always works. It is just that this is the only time the show let you watch it in real time. Consider how many times Springfield has experienced events that should permanently alter the town's reality. The dome, the environmental catastrophe, the near-nuclear meltdowns, the alien encounters in various holiday episodes, the destroying and rebuilding of major infrastructure, the disasters, catastrophes, civic crises, and existential threats that have descended on Springfield across 780 episodes. Each one, by any reasonable dramatic logic, should leave marks. Each one should change something about the town and the people in it. Each one should produce consequences that persist into the next episode. They do not. The next episode always begins from the same baseline. The town is intact. The characters are unchanged. The catastrophe has been absorbed and forgotten. Springfield resets. Fans call this episodic storytelling, a production convention of long-running television shows where each episode is designed to be self-contained and requires no prior knowledge of previous episodes to follow. This is accurate as a description of the production format, but it is not, in itself, an explanation of the phenomenon within the show's internal reality. Why does Springfield forget? What actually happens in the fictional world where these events are occurring to produce an effect that looks exactly like collective amnesia? The Principal and the Pauper offers a direct, in-universe answer. Springfield forgets because it votes to forget. There is a social contract in operation in this town, and the terms of that contract include an unspoken but powerful clause: we will not acknowledge what happened. We will not discuss it. We will sustain the agreed-upon version of reality even when the agreed-upon version is a lie, because the alternative, confronting what actually happened, would require confronting things that the town cannot afford to confront. This is not a fictional invention. This is how actual small communities manage collective trauma and scandal. Uncomfortable truths get suppressed. Crimes get quietly buried. Scandals are absorbed into an unofficial community narrative that acknowledges them only enough to dismiss them. The pattern is visible in real communities across American history. The town that covered up an industrial poisoning, the city that collectively looked away from a known predator, the neighborhood that simply never discussed what happened in the house on the corner. Springfield is doing the same thing on a grander scale and with more explicit machinery. The vote is usually invisible. The legal decree is usually unspoken. But the effect is the same. The truth becomes inadmissible, and the lie becomes the town's official reality, maintained by consensus and enforced by the social cost of being the person who insists on a different version. The real Seymour Skinner was Springfield's canary in the coal mine. He arrived with proof that the official narrative was wrong. He had evidence. He had his own testimony. He had his identity, which was being occupied by someone else. And Springfield's response was not gratitude, not recognition, not justice. It was expulsion. The town tied the truth to a train and sent it away. This is not just the story of Skinner and Tamzarian. It is the operating logic of Springfield applied to its most extreme case. Every time the town has encountered evidence that their power plant is poisoning them, they have expulsed that evidence. Every time they have encountered proof that their community is not what it appears to be, they have voted, silently and collectively, to maintain the appearance. Every time an inconvenient truth has threatened the stability of the agreed-upon reality, Springfield has found a way to remove it. The radiation, the contaminated fish, the safety violations, the skeletons in the basement, all of it has been managed the same way the real Seymour Skinner was managed. Acknowledged just long enough to be officially dismissed, then expelled from the communal narrative and made illegal to raise again. And if the coma theory is true, if everything since season 4 is Homer's dream, then the Principal and the Pauper takes on a dimension that is almost unbearable in its internal logic. Homer's unconscious mind invented a story in which an entire town votes to sustain a false identity because the false identity is more comfortable than the real one. Homer's dreaming brain constructed a parable about collective self-deception and the violent rejection of inconvenient truth, because that is what Homer's coma is. A fake life replacing a real one. A dream masquerading as reality. And as long as nobody questions it, as long as the dream town of Springfield keeps voting to maintain the fiction, Homer never has to wake up and find out what is waiting for him on the other side of consciousness. The episode is not the show's worst hour. It is the show's most revealing hour. It is the moment where the Simpsons stopped hiding the machinery of Springfield's denial and put it on the table for the audience to examine. And the audience, having examined it, hated what it saw. Not because the episode was bad, because the episode was true. Armin Tamzarian is still pretending to be Seymour Skinner. Springfield is still pretending everything is fine. The real Seymour Skinner is still somewhere out there, tied to a train, moving away from the town that expelled him. He was the last honest man in a community that made honesty illegal. And he will not be coming back. Number, Section 10. Hans Moleman, Ned Flanders, and the show's hidden tragedies. Before we bring everything together, two shorter mysteries deserve their time. The first is a body count that the show has been quietly maintaining for 3.5 decades. The second is the darkest reading of the character who appears, on every surface, to be the most purely decent person in Springfield. Let's start with Hans Moleman. If you have watched The Simpsons for any length of time, you know who Hans Moleman is. The tiny, elderly, nearly sightless man who appears in Springfield's background scenes and exists, functionally, to experience catastrophic misfortune. He gets struck by cars. He gets crushed. He gets buried alive. He gets attacked by animals. He gets struck by lightning. He walks into traffic. He falls into open trenches. He is incinerated, drowned, and flattened. He suffers, visibly and repeatedly, in ways that the show presents as recurring background comedy. Hans Moleman has died on screen dozens of times. Not in Treehouse of Horror episodes, where the rules are explicitly suspended. Not in dream sequences or fantasy asides. In regular, canonical episodes of the show, he dies, and then he appears in the next episode, intact and unremarked upon, ready for the next catastrophic encounter with Springfield's physical and social environment. Most viewers accept this as a running gag. Moleman dies a lot. It is funny because it keeps happening. The repetition is the joke. Do not think about it. But the theories we have spent the last several hours exploring have trained us to think about exactly the things the show tells us not to think about. And Hans Moleman deserves the same examination as everything else in Springfield. Under the radiation theory, Moleman represents a possible extreme. A man whose biology has been so thoroughly altered by extended nuclear exposure that his body has developed the capacity to reconstitute itself after what should be fatal trauma. Homer survives impossible injuries, but Homer does not die from them. Moleman actually dies. His body ceases function entirely, and then it resets. Whatever the power plant has done to Moleman's cellular structure has produced something that resembles, functionally, biological resurrection. Death in Springfield is a temporary condition for at least one of its residents. And there is something even stranger about Moleman that the show dropped into dialogue once and never revisited. He stated his age as 31 years old. Look at Hans Moleman. He appears to be in his 80s or 90s at minimum. The combination of his apparent age, his near blindness, his extreme physical frailty, and his apparent inability to navigate the basic hazards of daily life suggests someone in the very late stages of a very long life. And the show, in a single throwaway line, tells you he is 31 years old. If Moleman is telling the truth, and there is no reason in the show's canon to believe he is lying, then something aged him catastrophically. Something took a man who should be in his early 30s, with most of his life ahead of him, and compressed decades of physical deterioration into a body that should be in its prime. Something that also apparently made him nearly indestructible, despite his apparent physical ruin. Something that turned death into a revolving door for him, rather than the permanent threshold it is for everyone else. The radiation theory has an answer for this. The coma theory has an answer for this. The collective denial theory, which we explored through The Principal and the Pauper, has an answer for this. Springfield has agreed not to notice that one of its residents keeps dying, the same way it has agreed not to notice everything else that should be alarming. The only theory that does not have an answer is the one that says The Simpsons is just a cartoon and none of it means anything. That theory is, in the context of everything we have examined tonight, the least satisfying option available. Now, Ned Flanders. Ned Flanders is everything Homer Simpson is not. He is kind. He is generous. He is devoutly, sincerely religious. He is physically fit in ways that stand in visible contrast to Homer's physical condition. He is financially responsible. He is a good father to his sons. He is a good neighbor to the family next door. a family that has, over 3.5 decades, tested that neighborliness to limits that would destroy most relationships. By any objective measurement, Ned Flanders is a better person than Homer Simpson in virtually every dimension. He tries harder. He gives more. He asks for less. He extends grace to people who do not deserve it, forgives offenses that warrant real anger, and maintains a cheerful, positive engagement with the world around him that seems almost supernatural in its consistency. And the show punishes him for it, relentlessly, without mercy, without apparent acknowledgement that Ned has done anything to deserve the punishment, except be genuinely good in a town that does not reward goodness. Ned's wife Maud was killed by a t-shirt cannon at the Springfield Speedway. The cannon misfired during a NASCAR event because Homer was dodging the shirts being launched into the crowd, and the misdirected projectile struck Maud with enough force to send her off the bleachers. She died. Homer's characteristic selfishness and physical evasiveness, applied in the wrong moment in the wrong place, cost the most genuinely decent man in Springfield the person he loved most. And Ned forgave him, because that is what Ned does. He turns the other cheek. He processes grief and injustice and loss through the framework of his faith, and the framework tells him that forgiveness is required regardless of how unearned it is by the person receiving it. So Ned forgives. He absorbs the loss, and he forgives the man who caused it, and he keeps showing up every day as the same warm, available, infuriating, decent person he has always been. The moment the facade cracks, the moment Ned's sustained performance of goodness breaks down, is one of the show's most unexpectedly genuine scenes. After a hurricane destroys his house and the community rebuilds it so poorly that it collapses immediately upon completion, Ned snaps. He says things he has clearly been holding inside for years. He insults every person in Springfield who has ever wronged him. He articulates, in a sustained and specific way, every grievance he has accumulated and suppressed. The scene is funny, but it is also uncomfortable, because it feels less like a cartoon comedy beat and more like watching someone genuinely break down. And then he is institutionalized. In the mental facility, a psychiatrist reaches Ned through therapy, and what the therapy reveals is the foundational truth of the character. Ned was not always the way he is now. As a child, he was violent and uncontrollable. His parents, being dedicated non-interventionists who did not believe in discipline, took him to a psychiatrist who spent years conditioning the aggression out of him through intensive behavioral modification. The rage that existed in young Ned Flanders was systematically suppressed, redirected, and eventually buried so deep beneath layers of trained positive behavior that it became functionally inaccessible to adult Ned. Ned's kindness is not a character trait. It is a psychological cage built around a feral child by a doctor who spent years replacing one behavioral pattern with another. The patience Ned extends to Homer is not saintliness. It is a conditioned response. He cannot express anger because his brain was literally rewired to prevent it. The conditioning is so complete that the anger can barely find an exit even in moments of genuine crisis, and when it does find one in the hurricane episode, the release is so total and so unfamiliar that Ned himself cannot integrate it. And his faith. His faith, which the show presents as Ned's most defining characteristic, his most sincere and personal quality, reads differently once you understand the behavioral conditioning. Ned needs an external framework to explain why he keeps suffering despite doing everything right. He needs a narrative in which suffering has meaning, in which goodness is ultimately rewarded, in which the disparity between his efforts and his outcomes makes sense within some larger design. Without that narrative, he is simply a man who is conditioned into goodness and has received suffering in return, without justification or compensation. The show confirms this reading through a detail that is simultaneously a theological joke and one of the most pointed character observations in the series' history. God has spoken directly to Homer Simpson, multiple times, face-to-face, conversation. Homer, the man who sleeps in church, who blasphemes casually, who demonstrates no consistent practice of faith and no evident spiritual devotion, has had direct divine contact as a narrative fact of the show's universe. Ned Flanders, who attends church every Sunday, who has dedicated his life to his faith, who has organized his every behavior around his religious convictions, who has sought divine guidance in moments of crisis and grief, has never received any such contact. God talks to Homer. God ignores Ned. The drunk who falls asleep in the pew gets the divine conversation. The devout man who has spent his entire life listening for divine guidance gets silence. That is not random cruelty in the show's structure. It is a thesis statement. The Simpsons is telling you something about the world Ned and Homer inhabit. It is telling you that in Springfield, and perhaps more broadly, in the America that Springfield represents, goodness is not the currency that gets rewarded. Compliance is. The system does not care whether you are morally excellent. It cares whether you are tractable. It cares whether you will stay where you are put, absorb what is done to you, and keep showing up. Ned was conditioned into compliance before he was old enough to resist being conditioned. And his reward across 36 years has been loss, loneliness, and the company of a neighbor who will never appreciate what Ned offers him. Homer does everything wrong, and the system accommodates him because his grandfather made a deal, and his failures serve Burns's interests. Ned does everything right, and the system ignores him because his rightness does not serve anyone's interests. He is good in a vacuum. He is excellent in a context that has no use for excellence. Ned Flanders is what happens when you do everything the framework asks you to do, and the framework turns out to have been built for someone else. He is the saddest character in the show not because he suffers more than others, but because he suffers with full awareness and no adequate explanation and no available alternative. Homer's suffering is softened by his limited awareness of it. Maggie's potential suffering is managed by her extraordinary intelligence. Lisa's suffering is sustained by her belief that if she keeps fighting, something will eventually change. But Ned has seen clearly for decades. He knows what is happening to him. He understands the disparity between what he gives and what he receives. He simply cannot do anything about it because his brain was wired, before he had any say in the matter, to suppress the very responses that might let him walk away. He is next door to Homer Simpson. He has been next door to Homer Simpson for 36 years. And the gap between them, between the man who tries and the man who does not, between the life that is conscientious and the life that is heedless, has never once closed. Because in Springfield, the gap does not close. The system is not designed to close it. The system is designed to keep everyone exactly where they are, in the roles they have been assigned, doing the things they have always done, forever, in a loop that does not break. Springfield. Number, Section 11. The floating timeline time stopped, and we stopped it. We have spent several hours in Springfield. We have looked at the radiation. We have explored the dream. We have examined the shooting, the immortal billionaire, the silent genius baby, the prophetic writers, the three-generation conspiracy, the impossible geography, the town's machinery of denial, and the two characters whose lives illuminate different truths about a community designed to keep everyone exactly where they started. Now let's talk about the thing that connects all of them. The thing that every single one of these theories, regardless of their different premises and different evidentiary bases, arrives at through its own path. Time does not move in Springfield. Bart Simpson was 10 years old when the show debuted in December of 1989. He is 10 years old right now, in the present moment you are watching or listening to this. Lisa was 8 then. She is 8 now. Maggie was 1. She is still 1. Homer and Marge were in their mid-30s. They remain in their mid-30s. 36 years have passed in the world outside the television screen. 0 years have passed inside Springfield. The industry term for this is a floating timeline. It means the show's present is always the viewer's present. The characters live in whatever year the episode airs. In 1995, they lived in 1995. In 2015, they lived in 2015. In the present moment, they are living in the present moment. The cultural references change, the technology changes, the political context changes, the characters do not. This is a standard production approach for long-running animated shows, for the practical reasons we discussed in the section on geography. Aging the characters would require either ending the show or committing to a continuous narrative in which the children become adults, which creates its own structural problems. So the characters float. They exist in a permanent present tense where everything outside them changes and they remain fixed. Most people accept this without examining it. It is just how the show works. The kids are always young. The parents are always middle-aged. The dynamic stays the same forever. But The Simpsons has been running long enough, and the floating timeline has created contradictions large enough that the device no longer sits quietly in the background. It has become a visible structural fact of the show's reality, and examining it reveals something about the show that goes beyond production convenience. The most obvious symptom is the backstory problem. When the show began, Homer and Marge's shared history was set in the late 1970s and early 1980s. Their high school romance, their early courtship, the events leading up to Bart's birth, all of it was anchored to a specific era. Era-appropriate music, fashion, cultural references. It made sense for characters in their mid-30s in 1989 to have their formative years set in the 1970s. But if Homer and Marge are still in their mid-30s now, they did not meet in 1980. They met around 2005. Their high school experience was not defined by Watergate and disco. It was defined by social media and early smartphones, and a completely different cultural landscape than the one their original backstory inhabited. The show has accommodated this shift by simply rewriting the backstory multiple times. Homer and Marge have been grunge fans, and then indie hipsters, and then millennials navigating different cultural contexts in different flashback episodes. Each rewrite places their youth in the decade that keeps them the right age for the floating present. The characters do not have a fixed past. They have a flexible approximation of a past, revised as needed to maintain the illusion of temporal consistency in a timeline that is structurally incoherent. Their memories are unstable. Their origin story is a draft that gets revised every few years. The people who are supposed to be the stable emotional core of the show, the characters whose love story is the show's foundational relationship, do not have a reliable shared history. Their past keeps changing because the floating present demands it. Now apply all of the theories simultaneously. The coma theory says nobody ages because they exist in the frozen mind of an unconscious man. Homer's brain cannot allow his family to age because aging means time is passing, and time passing means the coma is deepening. The children are preserved at the ages they were when Homer lost consciousness, because those are the reference points his dreaming brain has available. The floating timeline is not a production convention. It is a neurological constraint. The radiation theory says nobody ages because the cellular mutation has altered biological processes in ways that affect the normal aging mechanisms. The contamination does not stop aging in any conventional biological sense, but it may alter the expression of aging so profoundly that the visible markers of time-passing wrinkles, graying hair, changed body proportions simply do not manifest the same way in a mutated organism. The agelessness is a symptom of the contamination, not a production convenience. The principle and the pauper theory says nobody ages because Springfield collectively agrees not to acknowledge the passage of time, the same way it collectively agreed to sustain Tamzarian's false identity and to forget every catastrophic event between episodes. The floating timeline is a social contract, not a technical device. Springfield voted to stay the same age. The vote was never formally held, but the consensus exists, and it is enforced by the same mechanisms that enforce every other form of collective denial in the town. The Burns immortality theory says that at least one character in Springfield has demonstrably found a way to arrest the normal progression of time's effects on the human body. If Burns can sustain himself for over a century through artificial means, then the concept of aging as an inevitable biological process is already negotiable in this universe. If it is negotiable for Burns, the question of whether it might be negotiable for everyone else in his vicinity, everyone who has been drinking the same water, breathing the same air, living within the influence of the same nuclear infrastructure that keeps Burns running, is not a question without an answer. Every theory arrives at the same conclusion. Time does not work in Springfield. Whatever the cause, the radiation, the dream, the collective denial, the medical technology, some combination of all four, the normal flow of time has been interrupted in this town. The characters are trapped. They cycle through variations of the same lives without aging, without growing, without reaching the conclusion that time normally delivers. The show has imagined its characters aging. It has done this deliberately, in specific episodes, and the results are always emotionally rich in ways that the regular series struggles to match. Lisa's Wedding, from Season 6, shows Lisa as a 23-year-old woman in a future that feels specific and real and emotionally true. She has grown up into the person the show has always suggested she would become. The episode is one of the series' most affecting. And then Lisa goes back to being 8. The future closes. The present resumes. The glimpse is sealed away. The show can imagine its characters grown. It chooses not to allow it. This is the choice that the floating timeline represents. Not a production limitation, but an active refusal. The show knows what would happen if the characters aged. It has shown us. And it has decided, for 36 years, that those futures are not for keeping. They are for visiting briefly and then sealing away. And here is where the floating timeline becomes something larger than a Simpsons observation. Because the show and its audience are locked in a mutual relationship on this point, and the responsibility for maintaining the loop is shared. The Simpsons are frozen in time, but we are the ones who keep them there. We tune in every week or every streaming session or every late-night comfort rewatch, and by doing so, we reinforce the conditions of the loop. We are the audience that demands the preservation. We are the community that voted, the way Springfield voted on Tamzarian's false identity, to keep the comfortable fiction rather than the uncomfortable truth. We agreed, collectively and without explicit discussion, that Bart should stay 10 and Lisa should stay 8, and the house on Evergreen Terrace should stay exactly the house it has always been. We pressed pause in 1989. We have not pressed play in 36 years. The reasons are understandable, maybe even beautiful. The Simpsons represent something we do not want to let go of. Not just the specific family, but the idea they embody. The chaotic, resilient, impossible, indestructible American family unit. The family that absorbs everything: poverty, catastrophe, shame, loss. The persistent ambient damage of living in a contaminated economy operated by people who do not care whether they survive and keep showing up, keeps eating dinner together, keeps watching television on the couch, keeps loving each other in the clumsy, insufficient, genuinely moving way that actual families love each other. We need that. Or we feel like we need it. And the floating timeline is how we protect it. As long as Bart is 10, as long as the opening credits play every Sunday night with the family rushing to the couch, as long as the loop holds, we do not have to confront the passage of time that the show represents. We do not have to acknowledge that the couch we sat on as children when this show began is gone now, or in someone else's house, or in a landfill. We do not have to face the fact that 36 years have passed and we are different, and the world is different, and the show is the one thing that has not changed. Letting The Simpsons age would mean letting the show end. And letting the show end would mean letting go of the version of America it represents, the version where the middle-class family survives, where the households, where the community, however dysfunctional and contaminated and collectively amnesiac, is still a community, where people still live next door to each other for decades, where fathers still come home from work to families that are genuinely glad to see them, even if they express it by immediately complaining about what he did wrong. That America feels increasingly fragile. Maybe it always was. The Simpsons, for 36 years, has been suggesting that it was always fragile, always one catastrophe away from unraveling, always dependent on the willingness of its members to keep showing up regardless of what the previous episode contained. But as long as the loop holds, the family holds. And as long as the family holds, the America it represents holds. The floating timeline is not the show's thesis statement about Springfield. It is the show's thesis statement about us. We are Springfield. We chose the comfortable lie. We voted to maintain the fiction. We made it illegal, in the quiet tribunal of our own hearts, to say that 36 years have passed and the Simpsons are old now and the story should end. Every time we watch, we tighten the loop a little further. We make it harder for the family to escape the amber they have been preserved in since 1989. We are, all of us, collectively, the mechanism that keeps Bart at 10 and Lisa at 8 and Maggie forever 1 year old. And the last mystery, the one that sits underneath all the others, that generates all the theories and all the analysis and all the hours of careful attention to a cartoon show about a yellow family in an impossible town, is the simplest one. Why can we not let them go? Number. Conclusion. The loop and the love letter. We have spent 4 hours in Springfield. We have pulled at threads that unravel into patterns. We have followed evidence through contaminated water and coma dreams and corrupted elections and family histories built on concealed betrayals. We have looked at Maggie's eyes and seen something extraordinary looking back. We have traced Burns's impossible longevity through the infrastructure of wealth and found that the scariest thing about it is not how long he has lived, but what his survival has cost the people around him. We have reopened the case that was never really closed and found that the official answer leaves questions open that should not stay open. We have watched a town vote to criminalize truth and realized that they have been doing it, less explicitly but just as completely, in every episode of the show's entire run. Every theory we explored tonight used different evidence, followed different logic, made different assumptions about what The Simpsons is and what it is trying to say. The radiation theory is a story about environmental destruction and the corporate suppression of its consequences. The coma theory is a story about grief and the lengths the human mind will go to in order to protect what it loves. The Burns mystery is a story about the way power maintains itself by making certain questions feel already answered. The Mona Simpson story is a story about how a single act of corporate retaliation can echo through 3 generations of a family and leave damage that nobody in the family fully understands. But every theory, regardless of its own internal logic, arrives at the same destination. Something is wrong in Springfield. Something structural, something deep, something that has been there since the beginning and that the show has never resolved, because resolving it would mean acknowledging it, and acknowledging it would require confronting the system that produced it, and confronting the system that produced it would mean challenging Burns. And challenging Burns would mean risking the stability of the entire arrangement that keeps the town running. So Springfield does not confront it. Springfield keeps the loop going. Springfield votes, in every episode, to reset to the baseline, to forget the catastrophe, to accept the contamination, to let the children stay young, and the parents stay middle-aged, and the billionaire stay impossibly alive, and the safety inspector stay impossibly incompetent, and the mystery stay unsolved, and the location stay uncertain, everything stay exactly as it has always been. And we, the audience, vote with them. Every time we watch. Every time we return to the house on Evergreen Terrace and find it exactly as we left it. Every time the couch gag plays and the family rushes in from different directions and lands together on the couch for one more episode, we cast our votes. Keep the loop. Keep the family. Keep Springfield. There is something in that which is not merely comfortable. There is something in it that is, in its own way, as moving as any of the darker readings we have explored tonight. Because the audience's relationship to this show is itself a love letter. We love these characters in the specific, irrational, tender way that you love something that has been part of your life so long it is woven into your memory of yourself. Homer and Marge and Bart and Lisa and Maggie have been there for everything. Every age, every version of ourselves we have inhabited across 36 years. They were there when we were children watching on our parents' couch. They were there when we were teenagers staying up too late. They were there during the difficult years and the good years, and the years we would rather not remember. They were always there, unchanged, exactly as we left them. That is extraordinary. That is something very few things in any life achieve. The sustained, reliable presence of something that does not change when everything else does. So, when Homer survives the unsurvivable and the credits roll and everything goes back to normal, when the loop completes and Springfield resets for one more week, when the family finds its way home by the end of the episode and settles back into the house that has always been exactly this house, it is not lazy writing. It is the show honoring the implicit promise it has been making since December 1989. We will be here. The family will be here. The house will be the same house. Come back next week and they will still be here. That promise, fulfilled across 36 years, is one of the most remarkable achievements in the history of the medium. And the theories we spend our hours developing, the careful attention we bring to the contaminated water and the coma dreams, and the impossible immortal, and the silent genius and the prophetic jokes and the geographic impossibilities and the mechanisms of collective denial, all of that attention is also love. It is a form of love that works through analysis rather than through nostalgia, but it arrives at the same place. We are looking this carefully at Springfield because it matters to us enough to look carefully. Because the show has earned that level of attention through 36 years of showing up, the loop is ours. We built it. We maintain it. We choose it every time we press play. And maybe that is fine. Maybe that is, in fact, exactly right. Maybe Bart should stay 10 years old for a little longer. Maybe the house on Evergreen Terrace should stay exactly as it is for one more season, one more episode, one more couch gag. Maybe Homer should keep stumbling home from the plant and finding his family there, loud and chaotic and imperfect and real, in the way that the families we love are real, which is to say in a way that has nothing to do with perfection and everything to do with presence. Maybe Springfield, for all its radiation and denial and impossible geography and contaminated water and unsolved mysteries, is worth defending, worth returning to, worth the 4 hours we spent in it tonight, asking the questions that its residents cannot ask and looking at the patterns they cannot see, because they are us. Whatever the radiation theory says about their yellow skin, whatever the coma theory says about Homer's hospital bed, whatever the geography says about the impossibility of their location. They are the American family. They are the family you grew up in or wished you had grown up in or are still, in some form, trying to build. They are the family that survives everything and forgets nothing important and remembers, every Sunday, to sit down on the couch together. That is worth a lot. It might be worth everything. The theories will still be there tomorrow. The mysteries will still be unresolved. The loop will still be running. And so will Springfield. It always is. That is the whole point. Thank you for spending 4 hours with us in this strange and impossible town. If you found something in here worth thinking about, we would love to know. Come find us, drop a comment, tell us which theory hit hardest. The conversation keeps going, the same way the show keeps going. The family will be on the couch next Sunday. They always are. Number, Section 12. The Simpson marriage, the most analyzed relationship in animation. If you asked most people to name the emotional center of The Simpsons, they would probably say Homer. He is the main character, the chaos engine, the one whose incompetence and resilience the show has built its entire comedic architecture around. He is the one who goes to space, who meets presidents, who holds 100 jobs, who survives every impossible thing the writers can conceive of. Homer is where the energy is, but the show's actual emotional center is the marriage. The relationship between Homer and Marge Simpson is the load-bearing wall of the entire structure, and everything else, every theory, every mystery, every dark reading we have explored tonight either supports that wall or pushes against it. And the reason the marriage survives everything the show puts it through is not because Homer and Marge are written as an ideal couple. It is because they are written as a real one. Flawed, frustrated, occasionally infuriating, and genuinely irreducibly committed in a way that has nothing to do with convenience or circumstance and everything to do with a choice that both of them keep making, every episode, without the show ever quite acknowledging how remarkable that ongoing choice is. Let's talk about what the marriage actually is, because the fan discussion around it tends to focus on Homer's failures, his selfishness, his incompetence, his recurring inability to prioritize Marge's needs over his immediate impulses and treat Marge as the long-suffering constant. That reading is not wrong, exactly, but it is incomplete. It misses what the show has been quietly depicting about Marge's interior life since the very beginning. Marge Simpson is not simply patient. She is strategically patient, which is a different thing entirely. She has a temper. She has ambitions that the show depicts across dozens of episodes as a police officer, as a real estate agent, as an artist, as a business owner. She has desires that extend well beyond the house on Evergreen Terrace and the domestic labor that constitutes most of her visible daily existence. She has, more than once, been depicted on the verge of leaving, of choosing something different, of deciding that the life she has built with Homer is not sufficient compensation for the life she gave up to build it. And she stays, every time, not because she has no other options, and not because she lacks the self-awareness to perceive the cost, but because the marriage is, for Marge, something that she has decided is worth the cost. That is a choice, not a default, and the show has been depicting that choice with more care and consistency than almost anything else in its canon. The episode that lays this bare most explicitly is Season 4's A Streetcar Named Marge, in which Marge auditions for and is cast in a local production of A Streetcar Named Desire. She plays Blanche Dubois. Homer is cast reluctantly as Stanley Kowalski, and in the process of working on the show, Marge makes a discovery that the episode handles with a delicacy unusual for the series at any point in its run. She realizes, through the emotional territory of the play she is performing, that she feels trapped, that her life, for all its genuine love and stability, has contracted around her in ways she has not fully allowed herself to notice. That she has been, in some capacity, performing contentment the way Blanche performs gentility with great skill and genuine internal cost. Homer, in the same episode, also makes a discovery. He watches the play. He sees Marge on stage in a role that draws from her own emotional reality. And he understands, for the first time and with genuine clarity, that his wife is a person with an interior life that does not always match the surface she presents to the household. That the woman he married is not simply the patient, capable, stabilizing force he has been taking for granted. She is a person. A complicated, unfulfilled, genuinely talented person who made a specific choice to be his wife and who is living with the full weight of that choice in ways he has been too self-absorbed to notice. The episode ends with the marriage intact, with Homer bringing Marge flowers and acknowledging, in his characteristic inarticulate way, that he sees her, that he understands, at least in this moment, that she deserves to be seen. It is a small scene. It is the kind of emotional resolution that the show handles briefly and then moves on from, because the next episode begins the reset, and Homer's awareness of Marge's interiority does not persist at the same level of clarity it achieved in that moment. But the moment was real, and the show produces versions of that moment repeatedly across its run, creating a cumulative portrait of a marriage that is not idealized but is genuine. A marriage between two people who are genuinely wrong for each other in certain fundamental ways. Homer's impulsiveness against Marge's caution, Homer's cognitive limitations against Marge's analytical intelligence, Homer's need for external stimulation against Marge's need for stability, and who have, through a combination of genuine love and sustained commitment, made it work for 36 years. That is not nothing. In fact, it is extraordinary. Not because it is romantic in the conventional sense, but because it is true in the sense that matters in storytelling. It reflects something real about how marriages actually function over long periods of time, not through consistent passion or perfect understanding, but through repeated choices, through the ongoing decision made every day and every episode and every season to show up, to stay, to let the love be sufficient even when the circumstances are not. The theories complicate this, as they complicate everything. Under the coma theory, the marriage is the dream's most protected content. Homer is unconscious in a hospital bed, and the thing his brain is most urgently trying to preserve is not his job or his friendships or his adventures. It is Marge. The entire simulation exists to keep Marge present and loving and committed to the life they built together. Every time an episode threatens the marriage, and the show has threatened it many times, depicted genuine crises, genuine betrayals of trust, genuine moments where the gap between what the marriage is and what both partners need from it becomes visible and unignorable, the dream reasserts itself. The marriage survives not because the characters chose to repair it, but because Homer's unconscious mind cannot allow it to end. The dream is, at its core, a love letter from a man in a hospital to the woman sitting at his bedside. And the letter says, over and over, in 1,000 different stories, stay, please stay. The kids still need you, and the house still needs you, and I still need you, even though I cannot tell you that right now because I am somewhere you cannot reach. Under the radiation theory, the marriage's survival becomes an expression of what the contamination takes and what it leaves behind. Homer's cognitive function has been severely compromised. His capacity for complex emotional reasoning has been diminished. But his attachment to Marge, his fundamental orientation toward her, has survived intact, perhaps because attachment operates at a different neurological level than analysis. Perhaps because whatever the radiation has done to Homer's brain, it has not touched the part that knows where home is. He stumbles. He fails. He forgets and neglects and occasionally catastrophically misjudges. But he always comes home. And that homing instinct, that reliable, unanalytical pull toward Marge and the house and the family, is the one function the radiation has not compromised. There is something in that which is worth sitting with for a moment. The radiation theory suggests that Homer has been cognitively stripped down to something close to his essential nature. The layers of social calculation and strategic self-presentation that most people build over time have been eroded away, along with a great deal else. What remains is what was always most basic: his love for Marge, his protectiveness toward his children, his need to be part of something larger than himself. The radiation destroyed the complicated Homer and left the simple one. And the simple Homer, for all his failures, is in some ways more honest than the complicated version could have been. The marriage also anchors the most sustained mystery in the show's history that is not about nuclear contamination or unsolved shootings. The show has depicted, across dozens of episodes, a tension in Marge's character that it has never fully resolved. The gap between who she is and who she has allowed herself to become in the context of her marriage and family. Marge was, by the show's own account, an exceptional student, intellectually capable, socially conscious, a person with genuine artistic talent and the kind of quiet moral seriousness that the show respects, in Marge as in Lisa, even when it cannot find adequate space for it in the plot. She gave up a version of a life, an undefined but genuinely possible version, in which her capabilities were more fully deployed to be a wife and mother in a town that is, as we have established, a contaminated zone maintained by a billionaire's self-interest. The show does not ask Marge to regret this, but it also does not ask her to be content with it, not entirely, not without complexity. And the episodes in which the complexity surfaces, in which Marge's larger selfhood makes contact with the domestic existence she actually inhabits, are consistently among the series' most emotionally sophisticated. She is the reason the family holds. She is the structural member that prevents the whole thing from collapsing. And she knows this, and she has chosen it. And the show has been honest enough about the cost of that choice to make the marriage something more than a sitcom convention. It is a genuine portrait of a specific kind of love. Practical, sustained, costly, real. The kind of love that does not ask whether it was the right choice, but simply keeps showing up because the choice has already been made, and the people who depend on it are still depending on it. The marriage is the show's most hopeful argument, not because it is happy exactly, but because it is enduring. Because in a Springfield that forgets everything, Homer and Marge have remembered each other. Every episode, every reset, every disaster and recovery, they find their way back to the same house and the same couch and the same complicated, genuine, necessary love. That endures. Number, Section 13. Bart Simpson and the theory of strategic failure? We have talked at length about Homer's failures and Lisa's excellence and Maggie's hidden capability. We have not talked about Bart, and Bart deserves his own examination because the theory about Bart is the one that most people instinctively resist, and that resistance is itself worth examining. Bart Simpson is not a failure. He is performing failure, strategically and consistently, for reasons that the show has encoded into his behavior since the first episode. This sounds wrong at first. Bart is the bad student, the rule breaker, the kid who cannot sit still or shut up or perform the basic academic and social functions that the institutions around him demand. He has been held back, written up, expelled temporarily, punished, embarrassed, and exposed repeatedly across 36 years of episodes. The show presents him as someone for whom failure is a natural state. His catchphrase is a declaration of determined delinquency. His relationship with authority is one of sustained, reflexive resistance. And yet, Bart has demonstrated, across dozens of episodes, a level of cognitive function and strategic intelligence that should not coexist with the academic performance the school records attribute to him. His pranks are elaborate, multi-step operations that require planning, timing, the accurate prediction of other people's responses, and the kind of improvisational problem-solving in response to unexpected complications that most adults struggle with. His social intelligence, while expressed in unconventional directions, is genuinely sophisticated. He reads situations quickly. He identifies leverage. He understands with considerable accuracy what makes people tick and how to use that understanding to produce specific outcomes. These are not the capabilities of a child who genuinely cannot learn. These are the capabilities of a child who has learned, very early and very thoroughly, that the specific things his environment rewards and the specific things he values are fundamentally incompatible, and who has made a rational decision to optimize for what he actually values rather than what the institution demands. Springfield Elementary, under Principal Skinner or Tamzarian, as we now know his actual name to be, is an institution that rewards a very specific kind of performance. Sitting still, following instructions, producing correct answers to questions whose correct answers have already been determined by someone else, expressing curiosity and creativity through the narrow channels that the curriculum provides, demonstrating compliance dressed up as engagement. This is not something Bart can do, because the reward structure is wrong for him. The things the school measures are not the things Bart is good at. And Bart, who is smarter than the school's assessment of him suggests, understood this very early and made a pragmatic decision. If the institution cannot see what I actually am, I will not bother showing it. I will give the institution the performance it has decided to expect from me, and I will reserve my actual capacities for things that matter to me. The theory here is not that Bart is secretly a genius in the way Maggie may be. It is subtler than that. It is that Bart is a person whose genuine capabilities do not map onto the capabilities that formal education is designed to develop and measure, and who has concluded, correctly, that fighting that mismatch is less productive than simply opting out of it. And in this, Bart is the most pragmatic Simpson, more pragmatic than Homer, who fights systems he cannot beat without understanding why he is losing. More pragmatic, arguably, than Lisa, who fights systems with full awareness that they are not designed to accommodate her, and keeps fighting them anyway because the alternative is capitulation. Bart has found a third option. Neither fight nor surrender, but a strategic sidestep. A decision to exist outside the system's framework entirely, rather than inside it on unfavorable terms. The Springfield Elementary that the show depicts is itself an institution worth examining, because it is a direct expression of the same systemic dysfunction that characterizes the town around it. Its budget has been repeatedly slashed, redirected, and eliminated most dramatically when Burns stole the oil well from beneath its grounds. Its teaching staff ranges from genuinely caring but overwhelmed, Miss Hoover, Bart's teacher, in her better moments, to actively derelict. Its principal is a man we now know to be operating under a false identity, which raises questions about every academic credential and professional qualification he has presented in that role. The school cannot adequately serve its students because it does not have the resources to serve them, because the resources were systematically stripped by the same industrial and political forces that have stripped everything else from Springfield. And the children in that school are not failing because they are fundamentally incapable. They are failing because an underfunded, administratively compromised institution, serving a population with documented cognitive impairment from environmental exposure, is not positioned to produce academic success. Bart's failure is systemic. The system failed Bart before Bart ever had the chance to fail the system. And Bart's response to being failed, his rebellion, his refusal, his sustained and energetic rejection of the institution's authority, is, when you look at it clearly, the only rational response available to him. He cannot fix the system. He cannot transform the institution. He cannot at age 10 address the environmental contamination that has compromised his family's cognitive function or the corporate greed that stripped his school's budget. But he can refuse to pretend that the system is working when it is not. He can make the dysfunction visible through his behavior rather than absorbing it quietly. He can be the noise that the system cannot mute. In this reading, Bart is not the Simpson family's problem. He is its truth-teller. The one family member who refuses to perform adjustment to circumstances that do not deserve adjustment. Lisa tells the truth with words. Maggie tells it with silence. Bart tells it with behavior. And behavior, in Springfield, where truth is criminalized and silence is normal and words are too easily dismissed, may be the most effective medium available. The coma theory frames Bart's arrested development most movingly. If Homer is dreaming, then Bart's perpetual 10-year-old state is the most poignant consequence of the dream's logic. Homer fell asleep while Bart was 10. His brain cannot imagine Bart at 17 or 25 or 35 because it does not have the sensory data to construct that imagination. The boy Homer knows is the boy in the dream, mischievous, loud, infuriating, occasionally, heartbreakingly, the boy who sits at his father's hospital bedside and cries and says it was my fault. That boy stays 10 because Homer needs him to stay 10. Because the alternative, the adult Bart that Homer cannot know, is evidence of all the time that has passed without Homer there to see it. And under the radiation theory, Bart's resistance to formal cognitive development may be environmental in origin. If the contamination has affected neurological development across the Springfield population, then Bart's academic profile strong in certain applied cognitive tasks, weak in the structured academic performance that schools measure, may reflect a pattern of neurological alteration that the contamination produces in some individuals. Not a global impairment like Homer's, but a selective one. Abilities intact or enhanced in domains that the contamination leaves untouched, compromised in domains that formal schooling is designed to assess. Bart is not stupid. He has never been stupid. He is a child operating in an environment that was not designed for him, in a town that was not designed for any of its residents, doing the best he can with the tools available to him in the only way that makes sense, given everything the system has done to everyone around him. The rebellion is the intelligence. The noise is the truth. And the boy who cannot sit still in Springfield Elementary's damaged classrooms is the same boy who, in his most genuine moments, shows us what the Simpson family would be like if it were allowed to be freely itself rather than what the contaminated town around it has made it. Number section. 14. The Treehouse of Horror and what the dark episodes reveal. Every October, The Simpsons does something unusual. It abandons the rules. The Treehouse of Horror episodes' annual Halloween specials that have been a fixture of the show since Season 2 exist in a narrative space outside the main continuity. Characters die and stay dead, at least within the special's runtime. The physical laws that govern Springfield's normal existence are suspended. Supernatural elements are treated as literally real. The show goes places it cannot go in regular episodes, tells stories it cannot tell within the constraints of the floating timeline and the reset button, and reveals things about its characters that the main continuity keeps carefully contained. And what it reveals, across over 30 annual specials, is worth examining, because the darkness that the Treehouse episodes express, the violence, the mortality, the horror, the genuine menace does not feel imported from outside the show's universe. It feels like something that was always present in the main continuity, kept beneath the surface by the conventions of a family-friendly comedy format, occasionally finding its way out through dreams and fantasies and holiday specials designed to operate by different rules. The most interesting Treehouse segments are not the ones that are simply scary versions of recognizable horror stories, with the Simpson characters cast in familiar roles. The most interesting ones are the ones that reveal something true about the characters that the main show cannot accommodate. The segment where Homer discovers the three-dimensional world and falls into our reality is, on the surface, a parody of mathematical concepts and science fiction premises. But within its brief runtime, it also depicts Homer as genuinely terrified of the unknown, not in a comic way, but in a sustained, sincere way that the main show's comic rhythm usually prevents from developing. The Homer in that segment is frightened of something he cannot understand, and his fear is real, and the show lets it be real for long enough to land. The segment where Bart is born with supernatural powers and uses them to terrorize the family depicts, without the safety net of comedy, what a genuinely dangerous version of Bart's rebellious personality would look like. The family cannot resist him, cannot correct him, cannot protect themselves from the consequences of his unbounded will. It is funny in the Treehouse mode of dark comedy, but it is also a genuine exploration of the fear that underlies the family's relationship with Bart's rebellion. What if he could not be contained? What if the thing that makes Bart Bart was not manageable within the structures of family and school and community? The segment where Homer accidentally creates a world without lawyers and then a world without anything uses its satirical premise to explore Homer's relationship with consequence, specifically his lifelong pattern of taking actions without fully thinking through their implications, and then being shocked and genuinely distressed by the results. This is also the fundamental structure of every Homer plot in the main show. The Treehouse version just makes the consequences apocalyptic rather than domestic. What the Treehouse episodes collectively reveal is that the main show's comedy is not just a tone choice, it is a protective layer. The warmth and humor and reset button continuity of the regular episodes are the mechanisms by which the show keeps a set of genuinely dark truths about its characters and its setting at a manageable distance. The Treehouse episodes remove the protective layer, and what you see underneath is not so different from what the theories we have been discussing all night describe. A world where the radiation runs wild and the mutations are literal. A world where Homer's poor judgment produces irreversible catastrophe. A world where Burns' evil is undiluted by comedy and plays out to its logical endpoint. The Treehouse episodes are what Springfield would be without the show's agreement to find all of this funny. They are Springfield without the loop, and they are disturbing in ways that the main show, for all its dark subtext, typically manages to keep just below the threshold of genuine discomfort. The radiation theory looks at the Treehouse episodes and sees them as honest depictions of what Springfield already is, expressed without the comedic framing that makes the main show bearable. The mutations are literal. The horror is real. The darkness is not imported from elsewhere, it was always there. The coma theory looks at the Treehouse episodes and sees them as the moments when Homer's dream becomes a nightmare. When the unconscious brain processing ambient hospital stimuli, the sounds of other patients, the conversations of medical staff, the emotional weight of the coma itself produces imagery that is too dark to be contained within the domestic comedy framework that the dream normally operates in. The Treehouse episodes are the nightmare sequences within the larger dream. The collective denial theory looks at the Treehouse episodes and sees them as the one context in which Springfield is allowed to acknowledge its own suppressed truths. The horror special is the only episode type in which the town's normal agreement to ignore catastrophe is officially suspended. For one episode per year, Springfield is allowed to remember that it is a contamination zone, that its residents are mutations, that its billionaire is a monster, that its safety inspector is genuinely dangerous. And then the special ends, the regular continuity resumes, and the forgetting begins again. One episode per year. That is the allocation. That is how much truth Springfield can tolerate before the social contract reasserts itself. The Treehouse episodes are not just fun horror anthologies. They are the show's pressure valve. The annual moment when all the darkness that the main continuity cannot accommodate is released in a controlled burst, then sealed away again for another year. Without the Treehouse episodes, the pressure would build in the main show in ways that would eventually become impossible to manage. With them, it bleeds off just enough to keep the loop stable, which is, of course, exactly how Springfield operates. Every time the truth gets close enough to be dangerous, the community finds a way to give it just enough space to prevent an explosion, and then seals it back up before it can do any lasting damage. Even the show's most honest moments are contained. Even the pressure valve is part of the system. Number. Section 15. The Springfield economy and Burns's monopoly. One dimension of the Springfield story that does not get discussed as often as the radiation and the coma and the shooting is the economic one. And the economic story, once you look at it carefully, is one of the most coherent and most damning threads in the entire show. Springfield's economy is, for all practical purposes, a company town. Not literally, there are other employers in Springfield, other businesses, other sources of income for its residents. But the nuclear power plant is the dominant economic institution. It employs a significant portion of the adult working population. It generates the electrical power on which every other business and household in the town depends. It anchors the local tax base. Its owner, Charles Montgomery Burns, has, through this economic centrality, achieved a level of political and civic influence that functions as de facto governance. Burns does not run Springfield. He does not need to. He owns the thing that runs Springfield. And in a community where the thing that runs everything belongs to one person, the distinction between ownership and governance is largely theoretical. The show has depicted the consequences of this economic structure across dozens of episodes. When Burns threatens to withdraw the plant's services to shut down the power supply, to lay off workers, to relocate operations, the entire town enters a state of crisis that makes the political leverage explicit. The community cannot resist Burns's demands because it cannot survive without what Burns provides. This is not metaphorical. The town has been placed, through decades of economic dependence, in a position where its basic physical needs, electricity, employment, tax revenue are contingent on one man's goodwill. And Burns is not a man particularly inclined toward goodwill. The economic monopoly explains some things about Springfield that are otherwise puzzling. It explains why, despite decades of documented violations and demonstrable harm to the community, the power plant has never faced serious regulatory consequences. Burns's economic influence extends to local politics. He has bought mayors, influenced elections, and maintained enough leverage over the town's governance that regulatory enforcement has been consistently compromised. The EPA's decision to dome Springfield rather than address its contamination at the source is, in this reading, a recognition that normal regulatory remediation has been tried and has failed because the regulatory apparatus that would need to enforce it has been systematically undermined. The economic monopoly also explains the deal between Burns and Grandpa Simpson. Burns did not need to make that deal. He could have fired Homer at any point on legitimate performance grounds, and given Homer's documented record of workplace failures, the grounds would have been overwhelmingly legitimate. The deal was not about protecting Homer, it was about something else. The deal protected Burns from whatever Grandpa had discovered about him, and the currency Burns used to buy that protection was Homer's permanent employment, a resource Burns controlled absolutely, and that cost him very little, since Homer's continued presence as a compliant, incompetent safety inspector was actually beneficial to Burns's operations rather than harmful to them. Burns weaponized Homer's employment as currency. He used something that cost him nothing, keeping a useless employee on the payroll, to purchase something that was enormously valuable, Grandpa's silence about whatever Burns had done. The deal was entirely asymmetric. Burns gave away nothing meaningful. Grandpa gave away his integrity and his ability to protect his family from the man who had already destroyed part of it. That is the economic logic of the show's central relationship. Burns has more than everyone else needs. And in a world where the physical infrastructure of survival is controlled by one person, having more than everyone else needs is all the leverage you require. The town cannot leave Burns's economy because there is nowhere else to go. The economy cannot function without Burns because Burns made sure it could not function without him. Every major employer, every significant institution, every piece of infrastructure that Springfield depends on has been, in some way, shaped by Burns's decades of economic intervention to ensure its dependence on the plant's continued operation. Springfield is not just a contaminated town, it is a captured economy, and the people living in it are not just residents of a polluted community. They are economic subjects of a man who has spent over a century engineering their dependence. Their inability to escape the situation they are in is not just cognitive, not just the result of neurological impairment from radiation exposure. It is structural. The exits have been closed, not by biology alone, but by design. The radiation made them unable to see it clearly. The economy made it not matter whether they could see it or not. Even a fully cognitively intact Springfield would struggle to escape an economic structure this deliberately and thoroughly constructed to prevent escape. Burns built the trap, the radiation sealed it, and the population, damaged and dependent and unable to perceive the full architecture of what surrounds them, simply keeps getting up every morning and going to work. Section 16, Lisa and the Weight of Knowing. We have discussed Lisa in the context of other theories throughout this night, but she deserves her own extended examination. Because Lisa Simpson is the most important character in the show, not the most central, that is Homer, but the most important, and the reason she is the most important is that she is the only character who consistently, across 36 years of episodes, tries to see Springfield clearly. Not succeeds, tries. The distinction matters. Lisa sees the contamination and tries to address it. She sees the institutional failures and tries to correct them. She sees the injustice and names it, loudly, repeatedly, at personal cost and with very limited practical effect. She is the show's moral conscience, the character through whose eyes the full weight of Springfield's dysfunction is most clearly visible, and the character who has to live with that visibility while everyone around her maintains the comfortable fog. The show has always been honest about what this costs her. Lisa's intelligence is her most defining trait and her greatest source of suffering. Not because intelligence is inherently painful, but because intelligence applied to a situation as comprehensively broken as Springfield is, and expressed in a community as resistant to intelligent intervention as Springfield is, produces a specific and exhausting form of grief. The grief of seeing clearly what cannot be fixed. The grief of knowing what should be done and being unable to do it. The grief of caring more than the systems around you are designed to accommodate. Lisa has been experiencing this grief since she was 8 years old. She will experience it for as long as she is 8 years old, which is to say forever, because the floating timeline never lets her grow past it. She is locked in the most painful developmental moment, old enough to understand the problem, young enough to be powerless to address it permanently. The loop does not just protect Homer's dream. It traps Lisa in a form of suffering that the show, by preventing her from aging out of it, has made permanent. There is an argument to be made that Lisa is the show's most genuinely tragic figure. Not Burns, who has engineered his own circumstances. Not Ned, whose suffering is the result of conditioning rather than clear-sighted choice. Lisa's tragedy is the purest version of the tragic mode. She sees clearly, she cares genuinely, she acts with integrity, and the world does not change. She is 8 years old, and she knows more about what is wrong with Springfield than any adult in the town, and she will be 8 years old forever, and Springfield will remain exactly as it is regardless of how clearly she sees it or how persistently she fights it. The radiation theory, applied to Lisa, produces something interesting. If the contamination affects different individuals differently, if Homer represents one extreme of the mutation and Maggie represents another, where does Lisa fall on the spectrum? The show suggests that her intelligence is genuine and significant, her IQ much higher than the average Springfield resident, her analytical capacity remarkable for someone her age. But she also lives in the same contaminated environment as everyone else. She drinks the same water, breathes the same air, has been soaking in the same irradiated atmosphere since before she was born. One possibility the theory opens is that Lisa's extraordinary intelligence is itself a consequence of the mutation, expressed in a direction opposite to Homer's impairment. Another is that Lisa's intelligence represents what Springfield residents would be capable of without the contamination that her cognitive function is, through some combination of genetic factors and the particular way the mutation expressed in her biology, closer to what the whole population might be if the plant had never leaked. She is, in this reading, not a genetic outlier, but a cautionary demonstration. This is what Springfield could think like. This is what the town's residents could be. And this is what the radiation has taken from them. In the coma theory, Lisa is the most poignant of Homer's dream constructions. He has dreamed up a daughter who is everything he is not, intelligent where he is limited, articulate where he stumbles, morally clear where he is muddy, capable of sustained, principled engagement with the world around her in ways that Homer himself can barely approximate even in his best moments. Homer's dream Lisa is his aspiration made flesh, the person he would want to be, the person he needs someone in his family to be, the person he needs to believe his children can become. And the tragedy of the coma theory's Lisa is that she is fighting, every episode, against a version of Springfield that Homer's unconscious mind created and that his unconscious mind maintains. She is arguing against the dream. She is trying to fix what the dream built, and the dream cannot let her succeed because the dream needs Springfield to stay as it is. It needs the loop to hold. And so Lisa argues and advocates and fights, and the world around her absorbs her efforts and resets, every episode, to the same baseline state. She is the most awake person in a dream, and that is the loneliest thing the coma theory imagines. The most moving episodes in the series are often the ones that center on Lisa's relationship with Homer. Not because their dynamic is simple, it is not. It is complicated by the cognitive and temperamental gulf between them, and by Homer's recurring failures to give Lisa the kind of engaged, attentive parental presence she needs. But because the love underneath the complication is so completely genuine, Homer loves Lisa in the specific, inarticulate, imperfect way that people love the things they cannot fully understand. He is proud of her in ways he cannot express adequately. He wants for her things he cannot fully specify. He would do anything for her, and the show has demonstrated this multiple times, while also demonstrating that his understanding of what she actually needs is limited by the same cognitive constraints that limit everything else about him. And Lisa loves Homer back. Not despite his limitations, which the show's lesser moments sometimes suggest, but including them. She loves the man he actually is rather than the father she might theoretically prefer to have. She loves his genuine delight in simple pleasures, his reliable warmth, his willingness to try when he understands that trying matters even if he does not always understand why. She loves him the way you love a person whose flaws are so thoroughly entangled with their genuine qualities that separating them is no longer a project worth attempting. This love imperfect, asymmetric, genuine, is another load-bearing wall of the show. It holds things up that would otherwise fall. And in the context of everything we have discussed tonight, in the context of contaminated water and coma dreams and three-generation conspiracies and a billionaire who will not die, the love between an intellectually extraordinary girl and her cognitively limited father is one of the most genuinely beautiful things the show has produced. She keeps fighting. He keeps loving her without fully understanding what she is fighting. And somehow in Springfield, that is enough to keep the family standing. Number section 17. The show's final mystery. Why we watch. We are near the end now. The theories have been examined. The evidence has been assembled. The patterns have been traced from the cracked cooling towers down through the contaminated water into the yellow bodies and four-fingered hands and inexplicably healing flesh of Springfield's impossible residents, and back up again through the floating timeline and the collective denial and the machinery of a billionaire's self-perpetuating empire. But there is one more mystery, the final one. The one that sits underneath all the others and that no theory has fully addressed, because addressing it means turning the analysis back on ourselves. Why do we watch? Not in the simple sense of why we find the show entertaining. We have discussed enough of what the show does to make that question easily answerable. The writing is extraordinary. The characters are among the most precisely realized in the history of the medium. The humor is intelligent and layered and rewards attention in ways that most comedy does not. These are the surface reasons, and they are genuine. The deeper question is why we keep watching something we have already seen, why we return to episodes we have watched dozens of times, why a show that has been running for 36 years, that has, in the view of many of its most devoted fans, been in decline for at least 20 of those years, still commands the kind of attention and affection and detailed analytical engagement that generates content like the 4 hours you have just spent listening to theories about it. Why Springfield? Why this family? Why this loop that we could escape by simply not pressing play, but that we keep pressing play on, season after season, year after year, decades after the episodes first aired? The answer that the coma theory offers is the most emotionally resonant, even if it is not the most factually accurate. We watch because Homer watches. Because inside the dream, inside the loop, inside the simulation that Homer's damaged and devoted brain has been running since April of 1993, we find something that the waking world struggles to provide in the same sustained way. A family that is always together. A home that is always the same home. A life that resets instead of ending. The world outside Springfield does not reset. In the world outside Springfield, time passes. People age, families change shape, houses get sold, children grow up and move away and become people their parents barely recognize, and the comfortable rhythms of the life that felt permanent turn out to have been temporary all along. The world outside Springfield is full of loss that does not undo itself at the end of the episode. Springfield does not do that. Springfield resets. The family reassembles on the couch. The children are always the ages they were when you first met them. The house is always the same house, and you can come back to it anytime and find it exactly as you left it. That is what we cannot find in the waking world, and Springfield offers it endlessly, reliably, without asking us to have grown up or moved on or let go of the version of ourselves that first sat down on someone's couch in December of 1989 and watched a yellow family rush to theirs. We watch because we are inside the loop too, not as dreaming patients in a Springfield hospital, but as an audience that has made the same agreement with this show that Springfield's residents have made with their town. We will not acknowledge that time has passed. We will come back and find everything the same. We will press play and let the couch gag run, and let Bart write his message on the chalkboard, and let the family arrive from different directions and pile together on the same couch in the same house on the same street, and we will not ask when this is going to end, because asking when it is going to end is the question that makes it end. The Simpsons has survived 36 years by being the show that the audience needed it to be in every decade it has run. In the late 1980s, it was the irreverent alternative to the sanitized family comedies that dominated primetime. In the 1990s, it was the sharpest satirical voice on American television. In the 2000s, it was a cultural institution whose history gave it weight that newer shows could not match. In the 2010s and 2020s, it became something stranger and more intimate, a form of comfort viewing. An old friend, something you return to not for the new discoveries but for the reliable presence of the familiar. And this is where the show's critics and its defenders are both right about different things. The critics are right that the show is not what it was. The formal quality of the writing in the later seasons, compared to the writing of seasons 3 through 8, is not the same quality. The ambition has diminished. The emotional precision has softened. The satire has become less pointed and more general. These observations are accurate. The defenders are right that none of this changes what the show is to the people who grew up with it. You do not watch a friend because they are performing at their peak. You watch them because they are your friend, and friendship is a different relationship than critical appreciation. The Simpsons became a friend to an enormous number of people across 36 years, and friends are retained even when they are not at their best, because the relationship itself has value that transcends the quality of any individual encounter. The final theory, and it is less a theory than an observation about the audience's relationship to the show, is that we have become what we were watching. We have become Springfield. Not in the sense of the contamination or the dysfunction or the political corruption or the collective denial, though these too have their analogies in the world outside the screen, but in the sense of the loop, in the sense of the communal agreement to sustain a comfortable fiction, in the sense of the vote cast silently and collectively every time we press play, to keep Bart at 10 and Lisa at 8 and the family on the couch and the show going for just one more season. We are the ones who cannot let them go. And the reason we cannot let them go is the same reason Homer cannot let them go in the coma theory. Because they are the family. Because they represent something about the version of American life we grew up in, or grew up believing in, or grew up wishing for. Because the house on Evergreen Terrace is the house we carry in our memories of who we used to be. Because the couch gag runs and the opening credits play, and for the length of that sequence, we are briefly, completely back. Back in the year we first watched, back in the house we first watched it in, back in the version of ourselves that sat down without knowing we were beginning a 36-year relationship with a yellow family in an impossible town. That is what the loop protects. That is what we protect by maintaining the loop. Not just the family, ourselves. The versions of ourselves that the show has preserved in the same amber that preserved the family. And maybe that is enough. Maybe that is in fact the right answer to the question of why we watch. Not because the show is perfect, not because the theories are proven, not because we have solved the mystery of who shot Mr. Burns or cracked the code of Springfield's impossible geography, or fully reckoned with the implications of the radiation theory, or the coma dream, or the three-generation conspiracy. But because the loop holds, because the family is on the couch, because Springfield is there, exactly as we left it, exactly as it always is, waiting for us to come back. It always waits. That is the whole point. Number, Section 18. Extended evidence, smaller mysteries, and overlooked details. Before the final close, there are smaller mysteries worth naming. Details the show dropped and never retrieved. Threads that were introduced and never resolved. Evidence that fits none of the major theories perfectly, but complicates all of them in interesting ways. The first is the question of Dr. Nick Riviera. Dr. Nick is Springfield's least qualified medical professional, which, in a town full of medically questionable practitioners, is a genuine achievement. He is licensed, apparently, despite a demonstrated inability to perform basic medical procedures correctly. He is available at any hour, charges very little, and asks no questions about the circumstances that brought his patients to him. He is, in short, the kind of doctor who exists to treat people who need medical care, but have reasons to avoid the kind of medical care that involves documentation. The theory about Dr. Nick is simple, but worth stating. He is Burns's instrument of medical suppression within the healthcare system. Not his primary physician, Burns has private doctors who manage the weekly treatments. But his presence in Springfield's general medical economy serves a function. He provides an alternative to legitimate healthcare for the segments of the population who, through poverty or fear or cognitive impairment or some combination of all three, need medical attention but cannot access institutions that would document their conditions. The conditions being, in many cases, the symptoms of radiation exposure that Burns has very strong reasons to keep undocumented. Dr. Nick treats the symptoms and does not ask about the cause. This is not incompetence. This is a specific kind of medical service that is only necessary in a specific kind of situation, a situation like Springfield's. Then there is Sideshow Bob. Robert Underdunk Terwilliger Jr., repeatedly escaped convict, multiple attempted murderer, genuine intellectual with advanced degrees, and genuine cultural sophistication, whose entire adult life has been organized around an obsessive vendetta against a 10-year-old child. The Sideshow Bob mystery is not about his crimes. It is about the inversion he represents. Bob is, by measurable standard, the most formally educated and culturally accomplished person in Springfield. He has knowledge, refinement, the kind of broad intellectual development that puts him in a different category from everyone else in the town. And this intelligence, this refinement, these accomplishments, they have not produced wisdom. They have produced monomaniacal fixation. They have produced a man who uses his exceptional intelligence in the service of an obsession that any reasonable external observer would recognize as a waste of everything he has. The radiation theory does not quite account for Bob, because Bob did not grow up in Springfield in the same way the Simpson family did. But Bob's recurring presence in the show raises a question that the radiation theory can engage with. What does the Springfield environment do to people who arrive in it from outside with their full cognitive faculties intact? Homer cannot perceive the contamination because the contamination damaged the faculties that would allow him to perceive it. What about someone who arrives in Springfield as an adult, already formed, already in possession of the analytical capacity that the local water supply has suppressed in the native population? Bob sees Springfield clearly. He has always seen it clearly. He knows what it is. He knows what Burns is. He knows what the plant is. He is one of the few characters in the show who could, theoretically, articulate the architecture of Springfield's dysfunction in terms that approach the accuracy of the theories we have been discussing. And what does he do with this clarity? He spends it trying to kill a child. He becomes so consumed by the personal dimension of his Springfield experience, his humiliation at Bart's hands, his derailed career, his repeated imprisonments, that the structural insight he could offer is buried beneath the obsession. The forest is consumed by one tree. The man with the clearest eyes in Springfield is looking in the wrong direction with them. This might be the most sophisticated joke the show has ever made. The character most capable of seeing Springfield clearly has devoted his clarity entirely to the wrong target, and in doing so, he has made himself just as ineffective as everyone else, despite being in possession of everything that should make him effective. Sideshow Bob is the show's comment on intelligence misapplied, on capability wasted, on what happens when the person with the tools to understand the system becomes so personally invested in one dimension of the system's injustice that they lose sight of the whole. The whole is Springfield. The whole is Burns and the plant and the water and the contamination and the decades of systematic exploitation. And the one person who might be positioned to articulate all of that clearly keeps coming back to a 10-year-old boy. There is also the persistent mystery of Springfield's founding. The town has a documented history that extends back several centuries. There are references to colonial-era Springfieldians, to a founding generation, to historical events that are tied to the town's early existence. And the Burns family is present in this history at essentially every significant juncture. Their wealth predates the town's industrial development. Their influence is evident across different historical eras. The Burns family has been in Springfield, in some form, for as long as Springfield has existed in any form. This raises the possibility never addressed by the show, never resolved, dropped as an implication rather than a storyline that Springfield's geography, its economy, its institutions, its culture, are not simply shaped by Burns's ongoing influence. They were, from the beginning, designed by the Burns family's presence. That the town is not a naturally occurring community that Burns happened to capture, but a structure that was built around the Burns family's interests from its earliest stages. If this is true, then Springfield was never a free community that was subsequently captured. It was always a company town, always a controlled environment, always a space designed to serve the interests of the dynasty at its center. The residents of Springfield are not people who were free and then became subject. They are the descendants of people who were always subject and who have never had access to a version of their town that was not organized around someone else's benefit. That is not just a theory about a cartoon show. That is a description of a particular and persistent form of American community whose history and present shape the lives of millions of people who have never lived anywhere near a fictional nuclear plant. And the show, 36 seasons in, is still circling around it without quite saying it, because saying it directly would require Springfield to see itself clearly. And Springfield, as we have established at considerable length, is not built for that. The loop holds, the water flows, the plant hums, the family sits on the couch, and somewhere in Springfield, somewhere behind the floating timeline and the collective denial, and the yellow skin and the four-fingered hands, and the inexplicable biological resilience of a man who has been failing upward for 36 years, the truth sits and waits. Patient, persistent, absolutely certain that no one is going to find it tonight. But we found quite a bit. We found enough to understand that Springfield is not simple, that The Simpsons are not simple, that a show that has been called lazy and past its peak for 20 years has been carrying, in its structure and its subtext and its accumulated evidence, a story far stranger and darker and more beautiful than anyone has been required to acknowledge. The radiation theory explains the bodies. The coma theory explains the aging. The shooting mystery explains the corruption. The Burns immortality explains the power. The Mona story explains the grief. The geography explains the unaccountability. The denial mechanism explains the reset. And underneath all of it, in the quiet space between one episode and the next, Lisa asks her questions, and Maggie watches, and Bart makes noise, and Homer comes home, and Marge keeps the whole thing standing. They are still there. They will be there tomorrow. They will be there when you come back to them, in whatever form you come back to them, however many years from now that coming back happens to be. Springfield does not end. The loop does not break. The couch is always the same couch. That is the final mystery and the final answer, and they are the same thing. It is enough. Section 19. The long game. What 36 years of storytelling actually means. There is a particular kind of attention that very long works of art invite. Not the sharp focus you bring to a film or a short story. Something that has a defined beginning, middle, and end. Something you can hold in mind all at once and assess as a complete object. But a diffuse, accumulated attention, a sustained relationship with something that keeps changing around you while you stay in roughly the same position relative to it. The Simpsons demands this second kind of attention, and it rewards it in ways that shorter works simply cannot. Because the show's meanings accumulate over time. The emotional weight of a Season 20 episode that references something from Season 4 is not accessible to a viewer who has only seen the later episode. It is only accessible to someone who has carried both moments, held them simultaneously, allowed the later one to reach back across years of intervening episodes and touch the earlier one. This is what 36 seasons of anything produces. Not just content, but a kind of temporal depth, a thickness of accumulated experience that gives individual moments a resonance they would not have in isolation. And The Simpsons, more than almost any other show in television history, has used this temporal depth deliberately. It has planted things in early seasons that paid off decades later. It has created relationships between characters that only become fully visible when you have watched those characters interact across hundreds of episodes. It has told a story about time specifically, about what it means to experience time without being changed by it, that could only be told by a show that has actually existed in time for as long as this show has. The theories we have explored tonight are, in some sense, a response to this temporal depth. They are attempts to find the coherent structure underneath the accumulated mass of 780 episodes. They ask whether the show, viewed in its totality rather than episode by episode, tells a story different from the one any individual episode appears to tell. And the answer, consistently, is yes. The individual episodes tell the story of a family having adventures, encountering problems, resolving crises, and returning to baseline. The accumulated totality tells a different story. A story about a family trapped in an environment designed to keep them trapped. About a town whose collective amnesia is not a bug but a feature. About a billionaire whose continued existence is contingent on the continued impairment of the community he exploits. About a mother whose enforced absence shaped a son who could not understand his own suffering. About a daughter whose intelligence is the town's most suppressed resource. About a baby who has been watching all of it and has not yet decided what to do. These stories are present in the show. They have always been present. They require the temporal depth of 36 seasons to become fully visible, because any individual episode can be explained away as a one-time premise or a joke that does not connect to anything larger. But across hundreds of episodes, the connections accumulate into patterns. The patterns accumulate into structures. The structures accumulate into something that looks, when you step back far enough to see it all at once, like a coherent and sustained argument about a very specific kind of American experience. The argument goes something like this. The American middle class exists in a relationship with power that it cannot fully perceive because the power is responsible for compromising the perceptual faculties that would allow it to see the relationship clearly. The contamination is not just nuclear. It is economic, institutional, cultural. It is the accumulated weight of a system designed to keep people in the positions that serve the system's interests rather than their own. It produces cognitive limitations not from radiation, though radiation works as a clean metaphor for the mechanism that make effective resistance difficult and sustained clarity nearly impossible. It produces collective denial, because individual clarity in the absence of collective clarity produces only isolation and grief, and isolation and grief are not sustainable. It produces the vote to sustain the lie, because the lie is the only version of the community that feels survivable. And it produces, inside all of this, genuine love, genuine community, genuine beauty, in the form of a family that keeps showing up for each other regardless of what the system has done to them, and regardless of whether they can see what the system has done. The Simpsons is not a critique of the American working class. It is a portrait of it, sympathetic and clear-eyed and honest about both its limitations and its genuine, irreducible human worth. The family survives because the love is real. The love is real even though the conditions that produced it are the result of exploitation. Homer loves Marge genuinely, even though Burns engineered the circumstances that made him the kind of man who would cling to that love with desperate, uncritical intensity. Marge loves Homer genuinely, even though the town's contamination and the family's financial precarity have contracted the scope of her life in ways she would not have chosen freely. Bart loves Lisa, even though their temperamental gulf is wide enough that most siblings would simply stop trying to bridge it. Lisa loves Homer, even though his cognitive limitations make him, in certain important ways, unavailable to her as a parent. The love is real. It exists in the same space as the damage. It is not separate from the damage, not untouched by it. It is threaded through it, tangled up with it, inseparable from the specific forms of need and limitation and compensatory devotion that the damage produces. This is not a comfortable portrait. It is not the portrait of a family that has found a way to transcend its circumstances. It is the portrait of a family that is fully shaped by its circumstances and that loves each other anyway, within and through those circumstances, with whatever the circumstances have left them capable of. That is, in the most fundamental sense, what The Simpsons is about. It has always been about this, in the way that great long works of art are always about the thing underneath the thing they appear to be about. The jokes are about Homer's incompetence and Bart's rebellion and Springfield's dysfunction. The show is about what it looks like to love people you live with in conditions that were designed to make loving them difficult. And the reason we keep watching, the reason we keep coming back to Evergreen Terrace across 3.5 decades and counting, is that we recognize this. We recognize the specific texture of this kind of love, shaped by constraint, expressed imperfectly, sustained through repetition rather than through peak moments of clarity or connection. We recognize it because most of us live some version of it, because most families are some version of The Simpsons, loving each other within systems that compromise them and in circumstances they did not choose. The theories illuminate the system, the show sustains the love. Both of these things are true, and the relationship between them, between the dark systemic reading and the warm emotional reality, is the most honest thing about the show. The darkness does not cancel the love does not cancel the darkness. They coexist, the way they coexist in actual lives, in actual families, in actual towns across an actual country that is both as broken and as beautiful as Springfield on its best and worst days simultaneously. The loop holds because we need it to hold. Springfield resets because we need it to reset. The family sits on the couch every Sunday because we need them to sit there, not because the show is afraid to let them go, but because we are. And the show has been honest enough about this for 36 years to keep providing what we need. That is the long game. That is what the show has been playing since December 1989, when a family of yellow strangers first settled onto a couch in a town with no fixed location and introduced themselves to an audience that would spend the next several decades trying to figure out what they had gotten into. We are still figuring it out. That is also part of the point. There is no final answer to Springfield. There is no endpoint for the theories, no revelation that closes all the open cases and resolves all the contradictions. The radiation theory accounts for the bodies and the cognitive compromise, and the way outsiders look different from residents. The coma theory accounts for the aging and the tonal shift, and the celebrity flood and the increasingly surreal plots. The shooting mystery accounts for the gap between official conclusions and actual evidence. The Burns immortality accounts for the century-long grip of one man's self-interest on an entire community. The Mona story accounts for Homer's emotional damage and the engineered incompetence that serves Burns's interests. The geography accounts for the show's appeal to every American, regardless of their actual location. The Tamsarian episode accounts for the mechanism of Springfield's collective amnesia. Lisa accounts for the consciousness that can see all of this and cannot change it. Maggie accounts for the hope that has not yet revealed what form it intends to take. Each theory is true about something. None of them is true about everything. And the space between the theories, the unresolved contradictions, the unanswered questions, the evidence that fits one framework but not another is where the show actually lives. In the ambiguity, in the openness, in the ongoing possibility that the next episode, or the next rewatch of an episode you have already seen 30 times, will reveal something new. Springfield is inexhaustible. That is its final mystery and its final achievement. 36 years of production and an audience that has been paying close and sustained attention for all of it, and the show still has things it has not fully given up, still has corners that have not been fully explored, still has the capacity to surprise, to unsettle, to reward the kind of attention that the theories we have been discussing are expressions of. The Simpsons will still be there tomorrow. It was there yesterday. It has been there every day since the 17th of December, 1989. And in whatever form you encounter it next, whether it is a rewatch of a classic episode, a deep dive into a later season you have never fully explored, a new episode in whatever the show's future holds, or simply the memory of the first time you sat down and watched the family rush to their couch, it will be exactly what it needs to be. Familiar, strange, funny, dark, inexhaustible, Springfield. It is always there. That is the whole point. That has always been the whole point. Number, Section 20. The Unsung Springfielders, Secondary Characters and What They Carry. We have spent most of tonight focused on the Simpson family and on Burns, which is appropriate, they are the center of everything. But Springfield's secondary population deserves its own examination, because the minor characters of the show are not just set dressing. They are, in aggregate, the most complete portrait of what chronic environmental and systemic damage does to a community when expressed across an entire social ecosystem rather than in a single family. Consider Mo Sislak. Mo runs a bar that serves as Springfield's primary social gathering point for its adult male population. He is rude, coarse, chronically unlucky in love, and possessed of a self-loathing so consistent and so comprehensive that the show has made it a character trait rather than a temporary state. He is deeply lonely. He is functionally incapable of sustaining the romantic relationships he desperately wants. He is, according to various episodes, a former child actor whose early career never translated into adult professional success. He is a failed prizefighter. He has, across various episodes, approached suicide close enough that the show has had to handle the subject with more care than it brings to most of its comedy. Mo is what the secondary Springfield males look like when the show removes the comic energy that insulates Homer from the full emotional weight of his circumstances. Without the cartoon resilience, without the coma dream's protective fiction, without the radiation's cognitive blunting, Mo feels the full cost of being the kind of person he is in the kind of town he is in. He cannot escape it. He cannot be distracted from it. And the show, in its better episodes, allows this weight to be genuinely present. The radiation theory applied to Mo produces a reading that is bleaker than most. If the contamination has compromised the cognitive function of Springfield's residents, then Mo's particular form of damage, his inability to think his way out of the self-destructive patterns that govern his emotional life, his consistent choice of avoidance over confrontation when it comes to his own unhappiness, might be environmental in origin rather than purely characterological. He is not simply a self-defeating person. He is a person whose capacity for the kind of self-examination that produces change has been impaired in the same way that Homer's capacity for connecting cause to effect has been impaired. Different expression. Same source. The coma theory gives Mo a specific function in Homer's dream. He is the friend. The one who is always at the bar when Homer arrives. Always available. Always serving. Mo's perpetual presence and perpetual availability are exactly what you would expect from a dream character constructed around the need for a specific kind of social support. Homer's unconscious mind needed a place to put Homer when he needed to be somewhere other than home, a social space where the pressures of work and family could be temporarily set aside, and it constructed Mo's Tavern to fill that function. Mo is there because Homer needs him to be there. His unhappiness is the dream's acknowledgement that this construction is not quite real, that a friend who is always available and never has competing needs is a wish-fulfillment character, and wish-fulfillment characters carry a certain sadness precisely because they represent something that does not exist in waking life. Then there is Apu. Apu Nahasapi Mapedalon runs the Quickie Mart, works an impossible number of hours per week, and is, in many episodes, the most reliably competent and professionally capable person in Springfield. He has an advanced degree. He is intelligent, culturally knowledgeable, a devoted husband and father, and a person of genuine moral seriousness who takes his responsibilities seriously in a community that does not always make taking responsibilities seriously easy. Apu's arc across the show's run is complicated by the well-documented criticism of the character's depiction, which resulted in the show stepping back from the character in later seasons, a decision that has its own controversies. Setting aside the meta-narrative around the character's cultural representation, Apu within the show's internal logic is a figure whose relationship to Springfield's dysfunction is different from that of the native-born residents. He chose to be here. He arrived as an immigrant, built a life, put down roots, and has stayed through robbery, through being shot multiple times, through the particular grinding difficulty of being a business owner in a town where the economy is shaped by forces largely outside anyone's control. He is not here because he was born here and has been too cognitively impaired to perceive a reason to leave. He is here because he decided to be here, and he has kept deciding to be here, in a way that implies either genuine attachment to the community or a recognition that Springfield, for all its dysfunction, provides something he values. This creates an interesting problem for the radiation theory. If the contamination produces measurable effects in people who live in Springfield long enough, and if Apu has been living in Springfield for decades, then the theory must account for what the contamination has done to him. And Apu's continued cognitive function, his intelligence, his general competence. These suggest either that the mutation expresses differently in people who came to Springfield as adults, with their neurological development already complete, or that individual biological variation produces a range of outcomes wide enough to include people who are largely unaffected alongside people who are severely compromised. The coma theory frames Apu more simply. He is one of the background characters that Homer's dream needs to populate Springfield's commercial life. He is the shopkeeper, the neighborhood constant, the familiar face in the reliable place. Homer's unconscious mind keeps Apu in the Quickie Mart because that is where Homer always encountered him, and the dream reproduces familiar patterns. What these readings share is an acknowledgement that Apu, like all of Springfield's secondary characters, is carrying something. A story that the show has given us pieces of without fully assembling. A life that exists in the margins of the main family's narrative, with a completeness that the margin cannot quite contain. This is true of almost every character in Springfield. Barney, whose alcoholism the show has depicted across the full spectrum, from comedy to genuine pathos. Lenny and Carl, whose friendship contains depths that occasional episodes gesture toward without fully exploring. Quimby, whose corruption is so systematic and so cheerful that it reads less as villainy than as a kind of adaptation to the environment. A man who has absorbed Springfield's implicit instruction to take what you can and not ask to. Many questions. Chief Wiggum, whose incompetence is so thorough it has become its own form of consistency. Each of these characters is a full person whose life is happening in the same contaminated, economically captive, collectively amnesiac town as the Simpson family's life. Each of them is navigating the same system with the same compromised tools. Each of them has found some accommodation with the impossibility of their situation, an accommodation that the show depicts, in its better moments, with the same combination of comedy and genuine sympathy that it brings to the Simpsons themselves. Springfield is not one family's story. It is a community's story, told through the lens of one family who happened to sit at the center of it. And the community, taken in its totality, all the Moes and Appas and Barneys and Wiggums and Krabappels and Lovejoys and Flanders and Burnses and Smitherses, is a more complete portrait of a particular kind of American life than almost any other piece of American fiction has produced. A life shaped by forces larger than individual choice, sustained by love and habit and the particular human capacity for finding meaning and connection within circumstances that were not designed to provide them. Funny, because the alternative to finding it funny is finding it unbearable, and comedy has always been one of the most powerful tools for making unbearable things survivable. And honest, underneath the comedy, about what those forces actually do to the people they shape. The secondary characters carry this honesty in the space the main family does not have room for. They are the texture of Springfield. They are the evidence that the family's experience is not exceptional but typical, that the contamination, the cognitive impairment, the economic captivity, the collective amnesia are not things happening to one family in isolation but to a whole community, simultaneously, in different forms and at different intensities. Springfield is large. It contains multitudes. And the more carefully you look at it, the more it contains. Every character is a theory. Every theory is a character. Every character is a door into a version of Springfield that is stranger and sadder and more generous than the version the show presents on the surface. We have spent 4 hours walking through those doors. We have not exhausted them. We never will. That is Springfield. That is the show. That is why we are still here. Number afterward. A note on Springfield's staying power. There is a question that comes up whenever someone spends serious time with a piece of long-running popular culture and begins to analyze it with the kind of sustained attention we have brought to Springfield tonight. The question is whether the analysis is finding things that are genuinely in the work, or whether it is a sophisticated form of projection, the audience seeing what it wants to see in a piece of entertainment that was never designed to carry the weight being placed on it. This question is worth taking seriously. It is not dismissible. There are absolutely moments in the analysis of any long-running franchise where the enthusiasm of the audience outruns the intentions of the creators, where patterns are found that are coincidental rather than designed, where the desire for depth produces the illusion of depth in material that is simply not as deep as the analysis suggests. But The Simpsons is not that show. Or rather, it is not only that show. It is also a show that was created and written, especially in its early and middle seasons, by some of the most intellectually serious comedy writers American television has ever produced. People who were thinking carefully about what they were doing. People who understood that the show they were making was not just a family comedy but a satirical project with genuine things to say about American life. People who planted things deliberately, who constructed characters with interior consistency, who designed the show's world with enough care that the world repays the kind of close attention the theories bring to it. The radiation theory is not something the writers invented fully formed and executed consciously across 36 years. But it is consistent with choices they made about the power plant, about Springfield's physical characteristics, about the visible difference between Springfield residents and outsiders that become meaningful when viewed in aggregate. The coma theory is not a hidden plotline that the writers have been secretly developing. But the tonal shift it identifies is real, and the details that support it. God's conversation with Homer, the 5% brain damage, the progressive surrealism of later seasons are in the show. The theories are not the show's secret meaning. They are the audience's best attempt to make sense of an enormous body of work using the tools of careful attention and pattern recognition. And the fact that these attempts produce coherent, internally consistent frameworks that illuminate aspects of the show that the surface reading does not reach that is not the audience projecting. That is the show rewarding the attention. Good art does this. It is constructed in ways that allow multiple coherent readings, that sustain analysis without collapsing under it, that reveal new dimensions when new questions are brought to it without betraying the dimensions that were already there. The Simpsons, in its best work, is this kind of art. And the theories are proof of that because they could not find what they find if the art were not there to contain it. Springfield is a real place in the sense that matters for analysis. It is internally consistent enough to sustain close examination over sustained time. It is rich enough to repay the attention. It is honest enough about what it is depicting that the depiction can be read and analyzed and theorized about without the analysis ever departing from what the show actually provides. That is the final thing worth saying about The Simpsons after 4 hours in its company. It is worth the time. It has always been worth the time. And it will keep being worth the time for as long as it runs, and for as long after it ends as the audience keeps returning to it. Which, given the evidence of the last 36 years, appears to be forever. Springfield. Still there. Still waiting. Good night.